The wind cut through the Montana Valley like a blade made of ice and broken promises. It was the kind of cold that didn't just chill your bones, it made you forget warmth ever existed. Gabe Calder stood in the center of his dying ranch, watching smoke rise from a burning pyre of cattle carcasses, and felt nothing. Not the cold, not the wind, not even the rage that had kept him upright for the past 3 months. Just nothing. "That's 47 this week," Tom Brennan said, approaching from the barn. The old ranch hand's face looked like weathered leather, creased with years of Montana winters and hard truths. "Found 6 more this morning that won't make it through the day." Gabe didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the flames consuming what used to be prime breeding stock. Animals worth more than most men made in a year, now reduced to ash and the sickening smell of burning hair and flesh. "Boss," Tom tried again, "we need to talk about—" "Don't!" The single word carried enough weight to stop Tom mid-sentence. The old man shifted his weight, snow crunching under his boots, and Gabe could feel the question hanging between them like the smoke from the pyre. "When are you going to give up?" "Never." The answer was never, even if never meant standing in the wreckage until the cold finally took him too. The Calder Ranch had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had carved it out of wilderness with nothing but stubbornness and a rifle. His father had expanded it, turned it into something that mattered. And Gabe? Gabe had watched it all die in less than a season. The plague had started small. 1 cow, thin and stumbling, her coat rough and eyes dull. Then 3 more. Then a dozen. The local veterinarian, a drunk who'd gotten his license from a correspondence school, had declared it bad feed, then bad water, then bad luck. It was none of those things. It was a death sentence written in a language nobody could read. "The bank sent another letter," Tom said quietly. "Came yesterday." "Burn it with the rest." "Gabe, I said burn it." Tom's jaw tightened, but he nodded. They both knew what the letter said anyway. Same thing as the last 5. Payment overdue, default imminent, foreclosure pending. Legal words for a simple reality. Victor Hale was going to take everything, and there wasn't a damn thing Gabe could do about it. Victor Hale. Even the name tasted like poison. The man owned half of Montana territory already, mining operations, timber rights, railroads, politicians. He collected land the way other men collected debts, and he'd been circling the Calder Ranch for 2 years now, making offers that started reasonable and descended into insult. Gabe had refused them all, so Hale had simply waited, patient as winter. And when the plague came, he'd smiled. "There's something else," Tom said. "The stagecoach came through. The woman you sent for. She's here." Gabe's chest tightened. Jesus Christ. With everything falling apart, he'd completely forgotten. 6 months ago, in a moment of whiskey-soaked desperation, he'd done something monumentally stupid. He'd contacted a matrimonial agency in Philadelphia, paid a fee he couldn't afford, and requested a mail-order bride. A companion. Someone to help manage the household while he managed the ranch. It had seemed logical at the time. The ranch was thriving. He was 34 and alone. The winters were long. Why not? Now? Now it was a cruel joke. He couldn't afford to feed his remaining cattle, let alone a wife. "Where is she?" "I put her in the main house. She's not what I expected." "What's that supposed to mean?" Tom scratched his jaw. You'll see." The main house sat at the center of the property, a 2-story structure built from local timber and river stone. It had been beautiful once. Now it just looked tired, like everything else. Gabe climbed the porch steps, his boots heavy with mud and melted snow. Through the window, he could see a figure moving in the front room. Small, composed, definitely female. He pushed open the door. She stood by the fireplace, her back to him, examining a painting of the ranch in better days. She wore a traveling dress in dark blue wool, practical but well made. Her hair was pinned up in a simple style, dark brown with hints of auburn in the firelight. "Mrs. Vance, I presume," Gabe said. She turned, and whatever words he'd prepared died in his throat. She wasn't beautiful, not in the conventional sense. Her face was too angular, her jaw too strong, her eyes too direct. But there was something about her that made the room feel smaller, an intensity, an intelligence that seemed to catalog and assess everything in a single glance. "Miss Vance," she corrected, "we're not married yet, Mr. Calder." Her voice carried an Eastern accent, educated, precise, nothing like the frontier women he knew. "Right, of course." He pulled off his hat, suddenly aware of how he must look. Unshaven, exhausted, smelling of smoke and death. I apologize for not meeting the stage. Things have been difficult. Yes. Your ranch hand explained about the cattle plague. Something in the way she said cattle plague made him look at her more carefully. Not sympathy, not pity, something clinical, analytical. I should be honest with you, Miss Vance. The situation here is not what I represented in my letters to the agency. You mean you're bankrupt, losing livestock at an unsustainable rate, and likely to lose the entire property within a month? Gabe blinked. Tom told you that. Tom told me about sick cows. I told myself the rest. She moved away from the fireplace, her movements efficient and purposeful. I passed 4 dead cattle on the road from town, observed 3 more in obvious distress in your western pasture. Your fences need repair. Your barn roof is damaged, and judging by the smoke, you've been burning carcasses for weeks. You're observant. I'm practical, Mr. Calder, which is why I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'd appreciate a direct answer. All right. Why did you go through with having me come here? You could have sent a telegram, stopped the arrangement, but you didn't. Gabe looked at her, really looked, and saw no judgment in her eyes. Just curiosity. And something else. Something that looked almost like hope, though he couldn't imagine why. Pride, maybe, he admitted, or stupidity. I kept thinking I'd figure it out, fix things before you arrived. But I didn't, and now you're here, and I don't have the money to send you back even if you wanted to go. I see. I can pay for a room in town for a few days, give you time to make other arrangements. The agency might— May I see the sick cattle? Gabe stopped mid-sentence. What? The sick cattle, the ones currently infected. I'd like to examine them. Why? Because I might be able to help. Miss Vance, I appreciate the offer, but unless you're a veterinarian, I'm not. She met his gaze steadily. I'm something better. Holt. The barn smelled like sickness and hay, and the particular kind of despair that comes from watching helpless creatures suffer. Gabe led Eliza through the main doors, past empty stalls that had once housed prize breeding stock. In the back section, separated from the healthy animals, 6 cows stood in various stages of decline. Rough coats, labored breathing, eyes dull with pain and exhaustion. Eliza approached the nearest one slowly, making soft sounds Gabe couldn't quite hear. The cow didn't react much, too sick to care about strangers. Has anyone performed an autopsy? Eliza asked. A what? An examination of the deceased animals, internal organs, tissue samples, that sort of thing. Gabe stared at her. We buried them. Or burned them. Unfortunate. She leaned closer to the cow, examining its hide with intense focus. Have you noticed any external parasites, ticks, lice, anything unusual? Some ticks, but that's normal for cattle. What about the timing? When did the symptoms first appear? Early autumn, September maybe. And the progression? What do you mean? Eliza straightened, pulling a small notebook from her dress pocket. She flipped it open to a blank page, pencil already in hand. Describe the sequence of symptoms. First signs to death. Be specific. Gabe felt like he'd stumbled into someone else's conversation. This wasn't how women talked, at least not any women he'd met. She sounded like a doctor, like a scientist. First they stop eating as much, he said slowly. Then they get weak, their coats go rough. They start losing weight even if you force feed them. Eventually they can't stand. Then they die. How long from first symptoms to death? 2 weeks? Maybe 3. She wrote rapidly, her handwriting small and precise. And treatment attempts? Everything. Change their feed, change their water, move them to different pastures. The vet tried bloodletting, purges, tonics. Nothing worked. Of course not. She said it matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather. Those treatments assume the illness comes from imbalance or contamination, but this isn't that kind of sickness. Then what kind is it? Eliza didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved to the next cow, then the next, examining each with the same methodical intensity. She looked at their eyes, their mouths, their ears. She ran her hands over their hides, feeling for something Gabe couldn't see. At the 4th cow, she stopped. There, she said quietly. There what? She beckoned him closer, pointing to a spot behind the cow's ear. Gabe squinted but saw nothing unusual. Just hide, just hair. I don't see. Look closer, right there. See that dark spot, smaller than a freckle? He did see it, barely. A tiny dark mark, easy to miss. That's a tick bite, Eliza said. And if I'm correct, that's your killer. Gabe straightened. Ticks? You think ticks are killing my cattle? Not the ticks themselves. What they carry. She closed her notebook, her expression thoughtful. There's a disease. Texas fever, some call it. Others use different names. It's caused by microscopic parasites that live in the blood. Ticks spread it from animal to animal. That's impossible. We've always had ticks, never caused problems before. That's because you've never had these ticks before. Or more specifically, ticks carrying these parasites. She paused. Tell me, Mr. Calder, have you purchased any new cattle in the past year, brought in stock from other regions? Gabe's mind raced backward. Last spring, I bought 20 head from a rancher down in Wyoming. Good breeding stock, or so I thought. Wyoming. Eliza nodded slowly. That could be it. The infected ticks likely came with those animals. They'd have built up immunity themselves, so they showed no symptoms. But once the ticks spread to your native herd, they started dying. Exactly. Gabe leaned against a stall door, feeling the weight of revelation settle over him like snow. Months of confusion, of helpless watching, of blaming himself for failing to save them, and the answer had been invisible. Microscopic. Can it be cured? He asked. Eliza's expression shifted. Not quite a wince, but close. That's complicated. That's a no. It's a maybe. She tucked her notebook away. In theory, yes. There are compounds that can kill blood parasites. Arsenic-based solutions primarily, but they're dangerous, toxic. Get the dosage wrong and you kill the animal faster than the disease would. But you know how to do it. How to get the dosage right. It wasn't a question. Eliza looked at him for a long moment, and Gabe saw something flicker across her face. A hesitation, a calculation, then a decision. I need to show you something, she said. But first, I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you must remain completely confidential. Why? Because if certain people knew what I really am, it could be dangerous for both of us. Gabe almost laughed. Lady, I'm about to lose everything I own. Dangerous is an improvement. She didn't smile. I mean it, Mr. Calder. What I'm about to share could ruin me, possibly get me killed. I need your word that it stays between us. The barn suddenly felt very quiet. Even the sick cattle seemed to be holding their breath. You have it, Gabe said. Eliza reached into her traveling bag, a sturdy leather case she'd set down earlier, and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She unfolded it carefully, revealing a set of instruments that made Gabe's chest tighten. Scalpels, forceps, glass vials, a microscope, medical tools, professional grade. My name is Eliza Vance, she said quietly, and I'm a trained parasitologist. I have a degree from the Philadelphia College of Medicine, 3 years of research experience in tropical diseases, and enough knowledge of veterinary science to have saved countless animals. She set the instruments on a clean section of stall divider. I'm also unemployable, unmarriageable by conventional standards, and currently wanted for intellectual theft by the institution that refused to acknowledge my research because I'm a woman. Gabe stared at her, then at the instruments, then back at her. You're a doctor. Not officially. Women can't be licensed physicians in most states. But yes, functionally, that's what I am. And the mail-order bride thing? The only way out of Philadelphia that didn't involve prison or poverty. I needed to disappear. You needed a wife. The arrangement seemed mutually beneficial. She met his eyes. I didn't expect to arrive and find a problem I could actually solve. A dozen questions fought for priority in Gabe's mind. Why had she been accused of theft? What research had she done? How did a woman end up with a medical degree? But only one question actually mattered. Can you save my cattle? Eliza's jaw tightened. I can try, but you need to understand the risks. This treatment is experimental. I've used it successfully on smaller animals in controlled environments, but never on cattle, never in field conditions. The margin for error is razor thin. What's the success rate? Unknown. Could be 90%, could be 10%. I simply don't have enough data. And if we do nothing? They all die. Every single one. Gabe looked at the sick cows. 6 in this barn. Maybe 30 more across the property showing early symptoms. Another 100 that were probably infected but not symptomatic yet. All dead. Unless he put his faith in a woman he'd met 2 hours ago. A woman who'd lied about who she was. A woman carrying illegal medical equipment and experimental cures. A woman who might be the only chance he had left. "What do you need?" he asked. Relief flickered across Eliza's face, quickly suppressed. "Time, space, complete control over the treatment protocol. And your trust that I know what I'm doing even when it looks like I don't." "That's it?" "One more thing." She picked up one of the scalpels, testing its edge with professional familiarity. "When Victor Hale finds out you're not giving up, he's going to come for you. These men who prey on the desperate don't like it when their prey fights back." "Let him come." "Mr. Calder, it's Gabe. And I stopped being afraid of Hale the day I realized I had nothing left to lose." He extended his hand. "We have a deal, Miss Vance. Save my cattle, and I'll make sure you stay disappeared." She looked at his hand for a moment, then took it. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused in a way that didn't match her educated accent or refined appearance. "Eliza," she said, "if we're going to wage war on invisible parasites together, we might as well use first names." "Eliza it is." They shook, and Gabe felt something shift. Not hope. He'd learned better than to hope. But possibility. The faint, fragile sense that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over yet. The work began immediately. Eliza moved through the ranch like a force of nature contained in a traveling dress and practical boots. She commandeered the tack room, transforming it into a makeshift laboratory. She sent Tom to town with a list of supplies that made the old ranch hand's eyebrows climb toward his hairline. "Arsenic trioxide?" Tom read aloud. "Copper sulfate? Lady, half this stuff is poison." "All of it is poison," Eliza corrected. "That's rather the point. And you want me to just walk into Morrison's general store and ask for it? Tell them it's for pest control, which is technically accurate." Tom looked at Gabe, who shrugged. "Do it." "Boss, you sure about this?" "No, but I'm sure about what happens if we don't try." Tom left, muttering about crazy women and desperate men, which Gabe figured was a pretty accurate summary of the situation. While they waited for supplies, Eliza began documenting everything. She examined every sick animal, recorded symptoms, drew blood samples that she studied under her microscope with intense concentration. Gabe watched her work and felt something like awe. She moved with absolute confidence, no wasted motion, no hesitation. This wasn't a woman playing at science. This was a professional operating in her element. "There," she said, adjusting the microscope. "Come look." Gabe peered through the eyepiece. The world became a circular field of red and white, cells swimming in solution. And there, tiny dark shapes, moving. "Those are the parasites?" he asked. "Babesia, named after the scientist who first identified them. They live inside red blood cells, destroying them from within. That's why the cattle get weak. Their blood can't carry oxygen effectively. And the arsenic kills them? In theory, the parasites are more sensitive to arsenic than the host tissue, so if I can hit the right concentration, I kill the infection without killing the patient. And if you get the concentration wrong," Eliza straightened, "then we find out very quickly." She said it calmly, but Gabe heard the weight beneath the words. She was betting everything on calculations, on theories, on research conducted in controlled environments that bore no resemblance to a freezing Montana ranch. "You're scared," he said. "Terrified," she admitted. "I've spent years trying to prove I belong in scientific spaces. If I fail here, it won't just kill your cattle. It'll confirm every doubt anyone ever had about women in medicine." "That's not fair." "Fair has nothing to do with it." She began cleaning her microscope with careful precision. "Male doctors fail all the time. Patients die. Treatments don't work. And everyone shrugs and says, well, we tried. But when a woman fails, it's proof that women shouldn't be doctors at all." Gabe had never thought about it that way. Failure as a rancher meant personal ruin. Failure for Eliza meant something larger. A verdict on every woman who came after her. "Then we don't fail," he said. She looked up, surprised. "We don't fail," Gabe repeated. "Whatever it takes, however long. We figure it out." For the first time since she'd arrived, Eliza smiled, small, genuine, and gone in a moment. But it had been there. "Then we'd better get to work," she said. Tom returned 3 hours later with supplies and news, neither of which were good. Morrison had most of the chemicals, he reported, setting bags on the tack room floor. "But word's spreading. Half the town knows you've got someone here trying to cure the plague." "Let them talk," Gabe said. "There's more. Victor Hale's in town. Heard him at the saloon telling anyone who'd listen that the Calder Ranch is finished. Says he's giving you 1 more week before he calls in your notes." Gabe's hands curled into fists. 1 week! "Actually works in our favor," Eliza said, measuring out arsenic trioxide with a precision scale. "Gives us a deadline. Focuses the mind. You think we can cure the herd in a week?" "I think we can cure enough to prove it works. The rest will follow." She sounded confident, but Gabe noticed her hands weren't entirely steady as she worked. They were attempting something that had never been done at this scale, with equipment that barely qualified as adequate, in conditions that were actively hostile to precision. And they had 7 days. "Where do we start?" Gabe asked. Eliza looked up from her measuring. "With the sickest one. If the treatment works on advanced cases, it'll work on early ones. And if it doesn't work, then we adjust the formula and try again. Science is iteration, Gabe. Failure is just data in disguise." Easy to say when the data isn't your livelihood bleeding out in the snow. True. She capped a vial, labeled it with careful handwriting. But I'm not wrong. They chose a cow named Bessie because even dying cattle deserved names, according to Tom. She was in bad shape, barely able to stand, her breathing labored. "If this works on her, it'll work on anything," Tom muttered. Eliza prepared the injection with steady hands, drawing the arsenic solution into a syringe. The dose looked tiny, almost laughably small against the bulk of a cow. "That's it?" Gabe asked. "Any more and we risk toxicity. Any less and it won't kill the parasites." She approached Bessie slowly. "Hold her steady." Gabe and Tom braced the cow while Eliza found the injection site, neck muscle near the spine. She swabbed the area with alcohol, positioned the needle, and pushed. Bessie barely reacted. "Now what?" Tom asked. "Now we wait," Eliza said. "The solution needs time to circulate, to reach the infected blood cells. We should see changes within 12 to 24 hours. "What kind of changes?" "Improved breathing, better appetite. Or she dies faster," Gabe finished. Eliza nodded. They left Bessie in her stall and moved to prepare treatments for the others. Eliza modified the dosage slightly for each animal, accounting for weight and symptom severity. It was meticulous work, requiring constant calculation and adjustment. Gabe watched her work and understood something fundamental. Eliza wasn't just treating sick animals. She was conducting research, building knowledge. Every injection was an experiment, every cow a data point in a larger investigation. "Why aren't you famous?" he asked during a quiet moment. Eliza looked up from her notebook. "What?" "If you can do this, cure diseases, save lives, why aren't you teaching at universities? Running hospitals?" Her expression went carefully neutral. "Because I'm a woman, Gabe. I told you that. But surely someone would see past—" "No." The word came sharp, final. "They wouldn't. I presented my research on parasitic infections to the Philadelphia Medical Society. Do you know what they did?" Gabe shook his head. "They laughed, called it feminine fancy, suggested I stick to nursing, where a woman's natural compassion would be better suited." Her jaw tightened. "Then, when I published anyway under a male pseudonym and the research gained traction, they accused me of stealing it from the fictional man I'd invented." "That's insane." "That's reality." She returned to her calculations. "So yes, I could cure diseases and save lives, but only if I could convince anyone to let me try. The matrimonial agency was my way out, a chance to disappear into the frontier where maybe, just maybe, I could do the work without anyone caring about my gender. And then you showed up to a dying ranch. Life has a sense of irony." She measured out another dose. "But at least here the cattle don't care if I'm a man or a woman. They just care if the treatment works." They finished the injections as darkness fell. 6 animals treated, 6 desperate gambles against invisible killers. Gabe stood in the barn doorway, watching Eliza clean her instruments with the same precision she applied to everything. She'd been traveling for days, arrived to a disaster, and immediately thrown herself into work that could define or destroy her entire career. And she hadn't complained once. "Why did you really come here?" he asked. Eliza paused in her cleaning. "I told you, I needed to disappear." "That's not an answer. There are easier ways to disappear than marrying a stranger in Montana." She set down the scalpel she'd been cleaning and looked at him directly. "You want the truth?" "Always. Because I was tired of fighting. Tired of proving myself to men who'd already decided I wasn't worth listening to. Tired of being brilliant and having it count for nothing." She gestured at the barn, the sick cattle, the improvised laboratory. "This is a disaster. Your ranch is failing. You're bankrupt. Victor Hale is circling. Everything is terrible." "Thanks for the summary." "But it's terrible in a way I can actually fix," she continued. "For once in my life, I have a problem where being smart and capable might actually matter more than being male. So yes, I came here to disappear. But more than that, I came here to finally be useful." Gabe absorbed that. The raw honesty of it. The weight. "You are useful," he said quietly. "Even if this doesn't work. Even if we fail. You're the first person who's given me hope in months. That counts for something." Eliza's expression softened slightly. "Ask me again in 12 hours, after we see if Bessie lives or dies." "Fair enough." They worked until midnight, preparing for the next wave of treatments. Eliza calculated dosages for the animals showing early symptoms. Gabe organized the barn, setting up isolation areas to prevent further tick transmission. It felt good to have a plan, to be doing something instead of just watching helplessly. Around 1 in the morning, Eliza finally stopped. "I should sleep," she said, though she didn't sound convinced. "The house has a guest room. Not fancy, but clean." "Thank you." She gathered her instruments, packing them away with care. "Gabe?" "Yeah?" "Tomorrow, when Hale hears about this, he's not going to be happy." "I know." "He might try to stop us." "Let him try." Eliza studied him for a moment, and Gabe had the distinct impression she was seeing past his bravado to the fear underneath. The knowledge that Hale had resources, connections, power that a failing rancher couldn't match. "We should be careful," she said finally. "I'm done being careful. Careful got me here. And reckless might get you killed." "Maybe. But at least I'll go down fighting." Eliza shook her head, but there was something like respect in her eyes. "You're either very brave or very stupid. Can it be both?" "Usually is." She left for the house, and Gabe stayed behind, checking on the treated animals one last time. They looked the same, sick, suffering, barely clinging to life. But somewhere in their blood, invisible battles were being fought. Parasites against poison, disease against cure. And by morning, they'd know which side won. Gabe stepped outside into the frozen night. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt, and the wind carried the smell of snow and smoke and something else. Something that might have been possibility. He thought about Eliza working in her makeshift laboratory with tools she'd smuggled and knowledge she'd stolen and courage that put most men to shame. He thought about Hale, probably sleeping comfortably in town, secure in his victory over yet another defeated rancher. And he thought about himself, standing on the edge of ruin with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. Yet, Gabe woke before dawn to the sound of Tom shouting. He was out of bed and running before conscious thought caught up, boots barely on, coat half fastened. The cold hit like a physical blow, but he barely felt it. Tom stood outside the barn, wild-eyed and urgent. Boss, you need to see this." Gabe's heart hammered. Bessie was dead. The treatment had failed. Everything was... "She's standing," Tom said, breathless. "Bessie's standing, and she's eating." Gabe stopped running. "What? Come look!" They rushed into the barn, and there, impossibly, miraculously, stood Bessie. Not strong, not healthy, but upright, awake, and eating hay from her feeder with slow, deliberate bites. "Jesus Christ," Gabe whispered. The barn door opened behind them. Eliza entered, still in her nightgown, with a coat thrown over it, hair loose around her shoulders. She took one look at Bessie and went very still. "Check the others," she said quietly. They moved through the barn together. Of the 6 treated animals, 5 were showing improvement. Standing, alert, eating. One, a younger heifer, hadn't made it. She'd died sometime in the night. The treatment too much for her weakened system, but 5 out of 6, 83%. It worked, Gabe said. Your treatment worked. Eliza knelt beside the dead heifer, examining her with clinical detachment, even as her hands trembled slightly. Not perfectly. We need to adjust the dosage for younger animals, account for body mass more precisely. But yes, the fundamental approach is sound. She stood, brushing off her nightgown, and looked at Gabe with something fierce in her eyes. We can save them, she said. We can actually save them. And for the first time in months, Gabe let himself believe it. The war had just begun, and they'd won the first battle. But Victor Hale was coming, and he wouldn't surrender his prey without a fight. Word traveled fast in a town the size of Blackwater Junction. By mid-morning, half the county knew that Gabe Calder's dying cattle were walking around like resurrection had come to the Montana frontier. The other half didn't believe it, which meant they were heading out to the ranch to see for themselves. Gabe stood on the porch, watching a line of wagons and riders approach through the snow, and felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't curiosity. This was something else. We should have kept quiet, he muttered. Eliza emerged from the house, now properly dressed, her hair pinned back with the same precision she applied to everything. About what? That 5 critically ill animals are now eating and standing? That kind of news doesn't stay buried, Gabe. Tom probably told 3 people, who told 3 more, who told everyone at the mercantile. Tom knows better than to run his mouth. Tom is proud. He just watched something impossible happen in your barn. Of course he told people. She descended the steps, her medical bag in hand. Besides, we need witnesses. When Hale tries to claim the treatment didn't work, we'll need people who saw it with their own eyes. You think he'll do that? I think he'll do whatever it takes to make sure you fail. Men like him don't accumulate power by letting obstacles survive. The first wagon stopped 20 yards from the house. Jacob Morrison climbed down, the general store owner who'd sold Tom the arsenic and copper sulfate the day before. Behind him came 3 more wagons, carrying ranchers Gabe recognized from surrounding properties. Men who'd watched their own herds die over the past year. Men who had nothing to lose by hoping. Calder, Morrison called. Heard you got a miracle happening out here. Not a miracle, just science. Science, hell, Tom says your dead cattle are walking. Morrison approached cautiously, like he expected this to be an elaborate joke. Says some Eastern woman's been dosing them with poison and they're coming back from the grave. The cattle weren't dead, just sick. And the woman has a name. Gabe gestured to Eliza. Miss Eliza Vance. She's a trained parasitologist. Morrison's eyes narrowed. A what now? I study parasites, Eliza said calmly, the organisms that were killing Mr. Calder's livestock, and I've developed a treatment protocol that shows significant efficacy. The ranchers exchanged glances. One of them, a weathered man named Frank Holloway, spat tobacco juice into the snow. You saying you can cure the plague? I'm saying I can treat the parasitic infection responsible for the symptoms you've been calling a plague. Yes. And how much you charging for this miracle cure? Eliza's expression didn't change, but Gabe caught the slight stiffening of her shoulders. I haven't discussed compensation. My primary concern is stopping the spread of infection. That's so. Holloway scratched his beard. Well, I got 40 head showing symptoms. You come treat them, I'll pay whatever Calder's paying. Me too, another rancher added. Got a dozen cows, won't make it through the week otherwise. I appreciate your interest, Eliza said, but I'm currently focused on Mr. Calder's herd. Once we've completed treatment here and documented the results properly, we can discuss expanding the protocol to other ranches. Morrison stepped closer, his tone shifting. Ma'am, with all respect, people are losing everything out here. You got a cure that works, seems wrong to hoard it. I'm not hoarding anything, I'm being methodical. This treatment is dangerous. Get the dosage wrong by even a small margin and you kill the animal faster than the disease would. I need to refine the protocol, establish proper guidelines, train people in safe application. Rushing could do more harm than good. Or you're just trying to drive up the price, Holloway said. The temperature around the porch seemed to drop 10 degrees. Gabe stepped forward, putting himself between Eliza and the gathering crowd. Frank, you want to accuse someone of profiteering, maybe look at Victor Hale. He's been buying up dying ranches for pennies on the dollar while you've been too busy suffering to notice. Hale's a businessman, that's different. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, Hale's been getting rich off everyone's misery, while Miss Vance risked everything to bring a cure out here. We just want help, Calder, that's all. And you'll get it. But on Miss Vance's timeline, not yours. Gabe's hand drifted to his hip, where his revolver usually sat. He wasn't wearing it, but the gesture was clear enough. Now, unless you came to actually see the treated cattle, I suggest you head back to town. The ranchers muttered among themselves. Morrison looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in Gabe's stance made him reconsider. They climbed back into their wagons, and the procession retreated down the road, leaving nothing but wheel tracks and tension in their wake. Eliza waited until they were out of earshot. That went well. They'll be back, and next time they won't ask nicely. I know. She watched the departing wagons with clinical detachment. Desperate people become dangerous people. It's a predictable pattern. You're not worried? I'm terrified, but fear doesn't change what needs to be done. She turned toward the barn. Come on, we have 30 more animals to treat before nightfall. They worked through the morning, moving systematically through the herd. Eliza had refined her dosage calculations based on the previous night's results, adjusting for weight, age, and symptom severity. Each injection took only seconds, but the preparation was meticulous. She measured every component twice, checked her math 3 times, and recorded everything in her notebook with cramped, precise handwriting. Gabe held cattle steady while she worked, watching her hands move with absolute confidence. No hesitation, no doubt, just pure, focused competence. Where did you learn to do this? He asked during a brief rest. Do what? Inject livestock. All of it, the calculations, the chemistry, the fearlessness. Eliza cleaned a syringe, her movements automatic. I was 12 when I realized I wanted to be a doctor. My mother died of childbed fever, and the physician who attended her did everything wrong. Wrong temperature treatments, wrong medications, wrong interventions. I watched her suffer for 3 days before she died, and I knew, absolutely knew, that if someone competent had been there, she'd have lived. That's heavy for a 12-year-old. Most heavy realizations are. She prepared the next injection. After she died, I started reading every medical text I could find. My father thought it was grief, that I'd move on eventually, but I didn't. I got obsessed. By 15, I was sneaking into public lectures at the medical college. By 17, I'd memorized entire anatomy textbooks. And they let you enroll? Eventually, after I sued them. She said it casually, like discussing the weather. Took 3 years of legal battles, but they finally admitted me under a provisional status. I could attend classes, take examinations, complete all the requirements, but my degree would never be officially recognized because of my gender. That's insane. That's Philadelphia in 1869. She moved to the next cow. I graduated top of my class, published research that advanced the understanding of waterborne parasites, and then got blacklisted from every hospital and research institution in the Northeast because I had the audacity to exist while female. Gabe absorbed that, trying to imagine the kind of rage that would fuel someone through years of rejection and institutional sabotage. How are you not more angry? Who says I'm not? Eliza positioned her needle. I'm furious, all the time. I'm just good at channeling it into something productive. She injected the cow, withdrew the needle, and marked her notebook. Another life potentially saved, another small victory against an invisible enemy. They were halfway through the herd when Tom came running from the direction of the road, moving faster than Gabe had seen the old man move in years. Boss, we got trouble! Gabe's chest tightened. What kind? The legal kind. Sheriff's here, and he brought company. Gabe and Eliza exchanged a glance. They both knew what company meant. Victor Hale had made his move. They found the sheriff standing by his horse near the main house, a lean man named Douglas Pike, who'd been wearing a badge in Blackwater Junction longer than Gabe had been alive. Next to him, sitting astride a black stallion like some feudal lord surveying his domain, was Victor Hale himself. Hale was 52 but looked younger, his face unlined by the kind of hard labor that aged most men on the frontier. He wore expensive clothes tailored in San Francisco, a gold watch chain glinting against his vest. His eyes were pale blue and completely devoid of warmth. Mr. Calder, he said pleasantly, I heard the most interesting rumor this morning. Mr. Hale. Gabe stopped a careful distance away. What brings you out to my property? Concern primarily. Word around town is you're conducting dangerous medical experiments, using toxic chemicals on livestock, potentially contaminating the water supply. Hale's smile was thin and sharp. As a concerned citizen and your primary creditor, I felt obligated to investigate. The only thing being contaminated is the truth. We're treating sick animals with proven scientific methods. Are you now? Hale's gaze shifted to Eliza. And this must be the mail-order bride I've heard about, the one claiming to be a doctor. Miss Eliza Vance, Eliza said, her tone professionally neutral. And I've made no such claim. I'm a trained parasitologist treating a parasitic infection. The distinction matters. I'm sure it does. To someone. Hale dismounted, his movements smooth and practiced. Sheriff Pike, would you say that administering toxic substances to animals without proper veterinary credentials constitutes a violation of territorial law? Pike shifted uncomfortably. Well now, Victor, I don't rightly know if... It's a simple question, Douglas. Is this woman licensed to practice veterinary medicine in Montana Territory? I suspect she's not. Then by territorial statute section 47, subsection 3, she's engaging in illegal medical practice, which gives you grounds to shut down this entire operation and confiscate any dangerous materials being used. Hale turned back to Gabe. Unless, of course, Mr. Calder would prefer to settle his outstanding debts immediately and avoid this unpleasantness. There it was. The real play. Not about law or safety or anything noble, just leverage. How much do I owe you? Gabe asked, though he knew the number by heart. $12,847, plus accumulated interest. Hale pulled out a pocket watch, checking the time like a man with places to be. I'll accept payment in full by end of business today, or I'll be forced to initiate foreclosure proceedings. You know I don't have that kind of money. Then perhaps you should have thought of that before investing in experimental medical treatments instead of honoring your financial obligations. Hale snapped his watch closed. Sheriff, I believe you have a duty to perform. Pike looked genuinely pained. Gabe, I don't want to do this, but if he's right about the law... He's not, Eliza interrupted. Territorial Statute 47, subsection 3 specifically exempts animal treatments performed by owners or their designated agents on their own property. Mr. Calder has designated me as his agent for this purpose, which makes everything we're doing entirely legal. Pike blinked. Is that true? I have no idea, Hale admitted. But I doubt Miss Vance has access to a complete legal library all the way out here. I memorized the territorial statutes during my journey west, Eliza said calmly. It seemed prudent to understand the legal framework I'd be operating under. Would you like me to recite the relevant sections? Hale's pleasant expression finally cracked, revealing something cold underneath. You're clever. I'll give you that. But cleverness won't pay Calder's debts. Neither will stealing his ranch. I'm not stealing anything. I'm exercising my legal right to collect on a defaulted loan. A loan you've been systematically undermining for months, Eliza said. Quite the coincidence, isn't it? You offer to buy the Calder ranch. Gabe refuses. And suddenly his cattle start dying from a disease that conveniently makes the property worthless. The air went very still. Pike's hand drifted toward his sidearm. Tom, standing near the barn, did the same. Hale's face remained placid, but his eyes went flat and dangerous. That's a serious accusation, Miss Vance. It's an observation. I'll save the accusations for when I have proof. You won't find any, because there is none. We'll see. They stared at each other, and Gabe recognized the moment for what it was. A line being drawn. A declaration of war. Hale broke eye contact first, turning to his horse. You have 7 days, Calder. After that, the ranch is mine. Legally, publicly, permanently. He mounted smoothly, gathering his reins. And Miss Vance, I'd be careful about making unfounded accusations. Montana Territory can be dangerous for people who don't know their place. Is that a threat? Gabe asked. It's friendly advice, from one businessman to another. Hale smiled. Though I suppose you're not much of a businessman anymore, are you? He rode off, Pike trailing behind with an apologetic shrug. They disappeared down the road, leaving nothing but hoofprints and the sick feeling that comes from being outmaneuvered by someone with more money and fewer morals. Well, Tom said into the silence, that could have gone worse. How? Gabe demanded. He could have shot us. Eliza stood motionless, staring at the empty road with an expression Gabe couldn't read. He knew, she said quietly. Knew what? About the parasite. About the infection being deliberate. She turned to Gabe, her eyes sharp. Did you see his face when I mentioned the cattle disease? He didn't look surprised. He looked annoyed that I'd figured it out. You think he's actually responsible? I think he's smart enough to recognize an opportunity when he sees one. Whether he created the opportunity or just exploited it? She shook her head. I need to examine your water sources, all of them. If this infection was introduced deliberately, there will be evidence. What kind of evidence? The wrong kind of ticks in the wrong places. Tick larvae don't naturally migrate long distances. If we find infected ticks near your cattle's primary water source, but nowhere else in the region, that's not natural dispersion. That's placement. Gabe felt something cold settle in his chest. You're talking about proof of sabotage. I'm talking about proof of biological warfare disguised as agricultural bad luck. Eliza hefted her medical bag. Show me where your cattle drink. They spent the afternoon examining every creek, pond, and water tank on the property. Eliza worked with systematic intensity, collecting samples, documenting locations, studying vegetation and soil composition with the same focus she applied to her medical work. At the fourth location, a natural spring-fed pond in the eastern pasture, she stopped. There, she said, pointing. Gabe looked but saw nothing unusual, just water and mud and cattails. What am I looking at? The vegetation. See how it's been disturbed recently? Those cattails were cut back, probably 3 to 4 months ago. And look at the mud near the water line. Those indentations. Gabe squinted. Barely visible in the frozen mud were shapes that might have been boot prints, or might have been nothing. Could be from anything. Wildlife, ranch hands. When's the last time you had anyone working this section of the property? Not since spring. This is summer pasture. Exactly. Eliza knelt, examining the area more closely. Someone was here, recently enough that the prints haven't completely weathered, and they were doing something near the water. She began digging carefully with a small trowel from her medical bag, removing frozen earth in precise layers. 6 inches down, she stopped. Gabe, look at this. He knelt beside her. There, wrapped in oilcloth and partially decomposed, was organic material. Plant matter, but wrong somehow. Too uniform, too deliberately placed. Eliza unwrapped it carefully, her face grim. Cattle hide. Infected cattle hide, if I'm not mistaken. Someone buried this near your water source months ago. As it decomposed, infected ticks would have emerged and spread to your herd when they came to drink. You're sure? I'll need to examine it under a microscope to be certain, but yes, I'm sure. She rewrapped the material, her hands steady despite the weight of what she'd discovered. This wasn't bad luck, Gabe. This was murder, slow, calculated, and designed to look natural. Gabe stood, rage building in his chest like steam in a boiler. Hale did this. We can't prove that, not yet. Who else would? Knowing and proving are different things. We need more evidence, documentation, something that ties this directly to Hale or his associates. Or I could just ride into town and beat the truth out of him. Eliza grabbed his arm. And then what? You'd hang for assault while Hale's lawyers claim self-defense. Your ranch would still go to foreclosure, and I'd be left alone to finish treating your cattle while dodging murder charges as an accessory. So we do nothing. We do everything, but smart. She released his arm. First, we finish treating the herd, prove the cure works. Then we document this evidence properly, photographs if possible, witness statements, chain of custody that would hold up in territorial court. You sound like a lawyer. I sound like someone who's been dragged through enough legal battles to know how they work. She picked up the contaminated material. This is our leverage, but only if we use it correctly. They returned to the barn as dusk settled over the valley. The treated cattle were showing continued improvement, standing, eating, even moving around their pens with something approaching normal behavior. Tom had finished the evening feeding and stood admiring the results with something like religious awe. Never thought I'd see it, he said. Dying cattle coming back from the edge. Science, Eliza said, not miracles. Same thing out here, ma'am. They worked into the evening, treating more animals, documenting responses, refining dosages. Eliza's notebook filled with dense calculations and observations. Gabe watched her work and felt something shift in his understanding of what was happening. This wasn't just about saving his ranch anymore. This was about proving something larger. That knowledge could defeat wealth, that intelligence could overcome power, that a woman with the right skills could accomplish what an entire system had tried to prevent. Around midnight, Eliza finally stopped. "We need to talk about the next 72 hours. "What about them?" "They're going to be critical. We've proven the treatment works on advanced cases. Now we need to treat the entire herd, including animals showing early symptoms. That's roughly 80 more cattle. How fast can we do it? If we work continuously, 3 days, maybe 4? She rubbed her eyes, exhaustion finally showing. "But there's a complication." "Of course there is. We're running low on supplies. The arsenic trioxide specifically. I have enough for maybe 40 more treatments, but after that," she trailed off. "Morrison has more at the store." "Morrison also has a big mouth and a business relationship with Victor Hale. The moment we order more chemicals, Hale will know we're scaling up. He'll move to stop us." Gabe leaned against a stall door, thinking. What if we went somewhere else? Next town over? That's 2 days' travel in winter conditions. We don't have 2 days. Then what do you suggest? Eliza was quiet for a long moment, her expression distant. There's another option. Riskier, but faster. I'm listening. I can synthesize additional arsenic solution from raw materials. It's not ideal. The purity won't be as controlled, but it's possible. What raw materials? Orpiment, arsenic sulfide ore. It occurs naturally in certain rock formations. She looked at him. Does your property have any old mining claims? Abandoned dig sites? Gabe's memory reached back. My grandfather prospected for gold back in the 40s. Never found much, but there's an old shaft up in the North Ridge. Why? Because where there's gold prospecting, there's often arsenic contamination in the surrounding rock. The minerals occur together. She grabbed her notebook, flipping to a blank page. If I can find ore samples with high enough arsenic content, I can extract and purify what we need. That sounds incredibly dangerous. It is. Arsenic fumes are toxic. The extraction process requires precise temperature control, and one mistake could produce a batch that kills every animal we treat. But it would work? In theory. There was that phrase again. In theory. The space between knowledge and certainty where all their hopes currently lived. All right, Gabe said. First light, we check the old mine. We should get some sleep first. Should and will are different things. Eliza smiled slightly. Fair point. They walked back to the house together, the frozen ground crunching under their boots. The sky was clear, stars brilliant against the black void, and Gabe felt the weight of everything pressing down like the cold itself. 7 days until Hale foreclosed. 80 cattle to treat, supplies running low, evidence of sabotage buried near his water source, and a woman who'd arrived as a purchased bride, now standing as his only ally against forces that wanted him destroyed. Can I ask you something? Gabe said. Of course. Why are you really doing this? The treatment, the investigation, all of it. You could have left the moment you saw how bad things were, gone somewhere easier. Eliza stopped walking, considering the question. You want the honest answer? Always. Because I'm tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being told I'm not good enough because of something I can't control. She looked up at the stars. This ranch, these cattle, this fight, it's the first thing in years that feels like mine. Like something I can actually win if I'm smart enough and brave enough and stubborn enough. And if we lose, then at least I lost on my own terms doing work that mattered. She turned to him. That's more than I had in Philadelphia. They stood there in the cold and the dark. Two people who'd been thrown together by desperation and circumstance, now bound by something stronger. Not love, that was too simple, too fast, but partnership. The kind forged in crisis and tempered by shared purpose. Get some sleep, Gabe said finally. Tomorrow we go mining for poison. Romantic, Eliza said dryly. Welcome to Montana. She laughed, a genuine sound that cut through the night's heaviness and disappeared into the house. Gabe stood alone for a moment longer, looking at his ranch, his dying, desperate, possibly doomed ranch, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not hope, not quite, but defiance. Hale wanted this land? Fine. He could try to take it, But Gabe wasn't going quietly into bankruptcy and ruin. Not while there was fight left. Not while there were cattle to save. Not while Eliza Vance stood in his barn mixing chemicals and proving that impossible things could happen if you were willing to work for them. The war had started, and Gabe intended to win. He turned toward the house, ready for a few hours of sleep before dawn brought new challenges. But movement in the darkness stopped him. A rider, approaching fast from the direction of town. Gabe's hand went to his revolver, finding it this time. He waited, tense, as the horse materialized out of the gloom. It was Morrison's son, barely 16, his horse lathered and breathing hard. "Mr. Calder," the boy gasped. "My pa sent me. You need to know, Hale's gathering men, lots of them. He's planning something for tomorrow." "What kind of something?" "Don't know exactly, but I heard him talking about ending this before it spreads. About making an example." The boy's eyes were wide with fear. "Pa says you should leave, tonight, before Hale comes." Gabe felt ice in his veins. "Thank your father for the warning." "You leaving?" "No." "But Mr. Hale, he's—" "I know what he is. Now get home before someone sees you here." The boy hesitated, then wheeled his horse and disappeared back into the night. Gabe stood in the darkness, processing the warning. Hale was escalating, moving from legal pressure to something more direct, more violent. He should wake Eliza, tell Tom, prepare defenses. But standing there in the cold, Gabe made a different choice. He smiled. Because Victor Hale had just made his first real mistake. He'd assumed Gabe would run. That fear would do what debt and disease couldn't, but Gabe wasn't afraid anymore. He was ready. Let Hale come. Let him bring his hired men and his legal papers and his absolute certainty that wealth equaled power. Gabe had something stronger. He had a woman who could cure the incurable, evidence of crimes that would destroy reputations, and the kind of desperate courage that only comes from having nothing left to lose. The war was coming to his doorstep, and he'd be waiting. Gabe didn't sleep that night. He sat in the front room of the main house, rifle across his lap, watching the road through frost-covered windows. Every shadow became a threat. Every wind gust sounded like approaching horses. But dawn came quiet, the sky turning from black to gray to pale blue without incident. Either Morrison's son had been wrong, or Hale was playing a longer game. Gabe suspected the latter. He found Eliza already awake in the kitchen, boiling coffee on the stove. She'd changed into simpler clothes. Wool trousers tucked into boots, a flannel shirt that had probably belonged to his father. Practical for the work ahead. "You look terrible," she said without preamble. "Didn't sleep." "I noticed. I heard you pacing." She poured 2 cups of coffee, black and strong enough to strip paint. "The Morrison boys' warning?" "How did you—" "I was still awake when he arrived. Sound carries at night." She handed him a cup. "So what's the plan? We leave, we hide, or we dig in? We work, same as yesterday. Even though Hale's planning something?" "Especially because he's planning something. He wants us scared and scattered. I won't give him the satisfaction." Eliza studied him over the rim of her cup. "You know there's a difference between bravery and stubbornness, right?" "Not from where I'm standing." "Fair enough." She set down her cup. "Then let's get to that mine before we lose the light. If we're going to synthesize more arsenic solution, I need raw materials today." They rode out an hour later, Gabe leading the way on his roan mare, while Eliza followed on a smaller bay Tom had saddled for her. The old mine sat 3 miles northeast, up in rocky terrain that discouraged casual visitors. Gabe's grandfather had spent 2 summers chipping away at granite, convinced he'd find the vein that would make the family rich. He'd found exactly nothing worth keeping, then died of a heart attack before admitting defeat. The mine entrance was barely visible under years of overgrowth in rockfall. A dark mouth in the hillside, maybe 6 feet high, leading into darkness that felt somehow heavier than normal shadow. "Cheerful," Eliza remarked, dismounting. She pulled a lantern from her pack, along with collection tools and specimen bags. "Stay close. Old mines are unstable." "You've done this before?" "Once. In Pennsylvania, a colleague needed sulfur samples from an abandoned coal shaft." She lit the lantern, adjusting the flame. "He fell through rotten flooring and broke his leg. I had to carry him out and set the fracture in a mine cart. Good times." "You're joking." "I wish I was." She stepped into the entrance holding the lantern high. Watch your footing, and if you hear creaking, move fast. The mine was exactly as Gabe remembered from childhood explorations. Cold, damp, and oppressive. Support timbers that had been questionable 30 years ago were now actively rotting. The floor was uneven stone, slick with moisture and bat droppings. The air tasted like earth and time, and things better left buried. Eliza moved deeper, examining the rock walls with professional focus. She'd stop occasionally, chip away a sample with a small hammer, hold it to the lantern light, then either pocket it or discard it. The process was methodical, patient, and entirely at odds with the creeping dread Gabe felt being underground. "How deep did your grandfather dig?" she asked. "Maybe 50 yards? There's a larger chamber at the end where he set up his equipment. Let's head there. The deeper strata might have better mineral concentrations." They continued inward, the tunnel narrowing then opening into the chamber Gabe remembered. It was larger than the passage, maybe 20 feet across, with evidence of his grandfather's work scattered everywhere. Broken tools, rotted rope, a rusted handcart tilted against one wall. Eliza set the lantern on a rock outcropping and began examining the walls with renewed intensity. She chipped samples from multiple locations, occasionally pulling out a small magnifying lens to study the crystalline structure more closely. "This is promising," she said, holding up a chunk of yellowish rock. "See the color? That's orpiment. Arsenic sulfide, exactly what I need." "How much?" "As much as I can safely extract and carry. We'll need—" She stopped mid-sentence, her head tilting. "Did you hear that?" Gabe had. A sound from deeper in the mine, not wind, not settling rock. Voices. He drew his revolver, moving to position himself between Eliza and the tunnel entrance. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the scrape of boots on stone. Multiple people, moving with purpose. "We should leave," Eliza whispered. "Too late. They're between us and the exit." The first figure appeared in the tunnel opening, a man Gabe didn't recognize, carrying a rifle and a lantern of his own. Behind him came three more, rough-looking characters who wore their violence like a second skin. And behind them, immaculate, even in a filthy mine shaft, came Victor Hale. "Mr. Calder," Hale said pleasantly, as if they'd met by chance at a church social. "How fortuitous. I was hoping we might have a more private conversation." Gabe kept his revolver trained on the nearest hired gun. "Funny place for a conversation. Privacy is hard to come by these days. Too many witnesses in town, too many people asking questions." Hale's smile was thin and cold. "But out here, no one for miles. Just us and the mountain." "Say what you came to say, Hale." "Very well, I'm prepared to make you a final offer. $10,000 for the ranch, paid immediately. You walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else. Miss Vance gets safe passage to wherever she'd like to go. Everyone leaves happy. Except the part where you poisoned my cattle and sabotaged my land to drive down the price." Hale's expression didn't change, but his eyes went flat. "That's quite an accusation." "It's a fact. We found the contaminated materials you had planted near my water source. Infected cattle hide, deliberately placed to spread the parasite." "Speculation. You have no proof I was involved." "Not yet," Eliza said, stepping forward despite Gabe's warning look. "But I will. Parasitic infections leave distinct patterns. Tick dispersal follows predictable geographic models. What's happening on the Calder Ranch doesn't match natural transmission. It matches deliberate introduction." Hale studied her with something like curiosity. "You're quite intelligent, Miss Vance. It's unfortunate you've chosen to waste that intelligence defending a lost cause." "The only lost cause here is your credibility once this gets to territorial court." "Will it, though? Get to court, I mean." Hale gestured to his men. "Accidents happen in old mines all the time. Cave-ins, gas pockets, tragic deaths that leave no witnesses and raise no suspicions." The hired guns shifted, hands moving to weapons. Gabe's finger tightened on his trigger, calculating odds that didn't look good. 4 armed men plus Hale against him and Eliza. In an enclosed space with limited cover. They were going to die in this hole. Unless. "Before you do something stupid," Gabe said carefully, "you should know that Tom knows we're here. So does Morrison's son. And half a dozen ranchers who saw us ride out this morning." "And?" Hale seemed unbothered. "And if we disappear, they'll come looking. They'll find this mine. They'll find evidence of whatever you're planning to do." "Will they?" Or will they find two unfortunate souls who died in a tragic mining accident, just like dozens of others over the years? Hale's tone remained conversational. You overestimate how much people care, Mr. Calder. Most folks are too busy surviving to investigate convenient deaths. Eliza's hand moved subtly to her medical bag. Gabe caught the motion in his peripheral vision and understood. She was reaching for something. A weapon, maybe, or a distraction. He needed to buy her time. You're right about one thing, Gabe said. I am defending a lost cause. This ranch is dying. My cattle are sick. I'm broke. But you know what the difference is between me and you? Please enlighten me. When I lose honestly. I don't have to murder people to protect my reputation. Hale's pleasant mask finally cracked. You sanctimonious fool. You think honor matters, integrity. These are luxuries for people who can afford them. I built an empire from nothing by understanding the only rule that matters. Power goes to those willing to take it. Is that what you tell yourself? That being a murderer is just good business? I tell myself that Montana territory belongs to the strong. Everyone else is just temporary. He nodded to his men. Make it quick. I have appointments in town. The hired guns raised their rifles. Eliza threw something, a glass vial that shattered against the nearest man's chest, releasing a cloud of acrid vapor. The man screamed, clawing at his face as whatever chemical she'd thrown began burning exposed skin. Gabe fired twice, dropping a second man before the others could react. The confined space turned into chaos, shouting, gunfire, the overwhelming smell of gun smoke and chemicals mixing in the enclosed air. The tunnel! Eliza shouted, grabbing the lantern. Gabe fired again, forcing the remaining gunmen to take cover, then followed Eliza as she sprinted deeper into the mine. Not toward the exit, that was blocked, but into the darkness beyond the chamber where his grandfather had given up digging. Behind them, Hale was screaming orders. After them! Don't let them escape! The tunnel narrowed, became rougher. This was untimbered shaft barely 5 feet high, forcing them to crouch as they ran. The lantern cast wild shadows that made the stone walls seem to pulse and breathe. Where are we going? Gabe gasped. I don't know. I'm improvising. Improvise faster. The tunnel forked. Eliza chose left without hesitation, pulling Gabe into a side passage that immediately began sloping downward. The air grew colder, damper. Water dripped from unseen cracks overhead. Behind them, lantern light appeared. Their pursuers were close. We can't outrun them, Gabe said. I know. Eliza stopped, setting down her lantern and digging through her medical bag with frantic speed. I need 30 seconds. For what? Chemistry. She pulled out 3 more vials, liquid sloshing inside. When I tell you to run, you run. Don't stop, don't look back, just get as far down this tunnel as possible. What are you doing? Something probably very stupid. She positioned the vials carefully on a rock ledge, then pulled out a 4th container, this one filled with white powder. This is phosphorus, highly reactive. When it mixes with the acids in these vials, gunfire echoed down the tunnel. Rock chips exploded near Gabe's head. Run! Eliza screamed. They ran, Gabe pulling Eliza by the arm as she grabbed her medical bag. Behind them, one of Hale's men reached the vials, saw them, reached out. The explosion wasn't huge, not the kind that brought down mountains, but in the confined space of an unstable mine tunnel, it was enough. The shockwave knocked Gabe and Eliza forward. The sound was overwhelming, a crack of thunder that made his ears ring and his head spin. Then came the rumble. The deep, ominous sound of stone moving against stone. The tunnel was collapsing. Move! Gabe hauled Eliza to her feet, and they ran blind through the darkness as the world came apart behind them. Rock dust filled the air, choking and thick. The rumbling intensified, surrounding them like the voice of an angry mountain. Then, impossibly, light. Not lantern light, daylight. The tunnel ahead ended abruptly in a vertical shaft, some kind of ventilation, opening his grandfather must have dug decades ago. Snow and sky visible above, maybe 20 feet up. Gabe looked at Eliza. She looked back. Neither said what they were both thinking. 20 feet might as well be a mile. But behind them, the collapse was still coming, eating the tunnel yard by yard. Climb, Gabe said. The shaft walls were rough stone, offering handholds but no mercy. Gabe went first, finding precarious grips and cracks and protrusions. His fingers went numb from cold and exertion. His shoulders screamed, but he climbed. Below him, Eliza followed, her medical bag slung across her back, her movements careful but steady. They were halfway up when Gabe's handhold crumbled. For one terrifying second, he dangled by 3 fingers, his boots scrabbling for purchase. Then his foot found a crack, and he pushed upward with everything he had left. His hand cleared the lip of the shaft. He grabbed frozen grass, pulled himself over the edge, rolled onto solid ground. Eliza! She was 5 feet down, struggling with the last section where the holds were smallest. Gabe lay flat on his stomach, reaching down. Grab my hand. She stretched, her fingers brushing his. Behind her, the rumble of the collapse grew louder. Dust billowed up from below. Jump! Gabe shouted. Eliza crouched on her perch, then launched herself upward with desperate strength. Gabe caught her wrist, felt her weight pull him forward, braced his legs against the shaft opening, and hauled. She came over the edge in a tangle of limbs and medical equipment, landing half on top of him in the snow. 3 seconds later, the collapse reached the vertical shaft. The entire structure shuddered, groaned, then sagged inward like a broken tooth. They lay there in the snow, breathing hard, covered in rock dust and chemical residue, alive by margins too slim to calculate. That was insane, Gabe finally said. That was necessary. You could have warned me you were carrying enough chemicals to blow up a mine. I wasn't. I was carrying chemicals with useful properties. The explosion was just creative application. Eliza sat up, checking her medical bag for damage. Though I'll admit the yield was larger than expected. Yield? Size of the explosion. You mean you didn't know how big it would be? I had theoretical calculations, but chemistry in practice rarely matches chemistry in theory. She looked back at the collapsed shaft. Did we just kill 4 people? The question hung in the cold air. Gabe thought about the men in the tunnel. Hale's hired guns. Violent men paid to commit murder, but still men, still human. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe. Probably. I've never killed anyone before. Neither have I. They sat in the snow, processing that. The weight of it. The moral complexity of causing deaths while defending their own lives. There were no easy answers, no clean justifications, just the messy reality of survival. We should move, Eliza said finally. If Hale got out, he'll come looking. If he didn't, then someone will notice he's missing and come looking anyway. She stood, brushing snow and rock dust from her clothes. Either way, we can't stay here. They made their way down from the ridge, moving carefully through snow and loose rock. Their horses were gone, probably spooked by the explosion, which meant a long walk back to the ranch. Gabe's mind raced through implications. If Hale was dead, the immediate threat ended, but new problems began. There would be investigations, questions, legal consequences. If Hale survived, he'd be even more dangerous. Wounded pride plus unlimited resources equaled a problem Gabe couldn't solve with guns or courage. They were halfway home when Tom found them, riding hard with 2 spare horses in tow. Boss! The old ranch hand's face was pale. Heard the explosion from the house, thought... He stopped, seeing them alive and mostly intact. What the hell happened? Mine collapse, Gabe said. Victor Hale decided to have a private conversation in an unstable shaft. Didn't end well for anyone. Hale's dead? Don't know. Might be trapped. Might have escaped. We didn't stick around to check. Tom processed that, his expression shifting through several emotions before settling on grim satisfaction. Good riddance, I say. Man's been a plague on this territory for years. They rode back to the ranch in tense silence. Gabe kept expecting to see riders approaching, lawmen or Hale's men seeking revenge. But the land stayed empty, the only sounds the creak of saddle leather and the crunch of hooves in snow. At the ranch, Eliza went immediately to check on the treated cattle. Despite everything, the mine, the collapse, the possible deaths, her first concern was the animals. Gabe watched her move through the barn, examining each cow with clinical precision, and felt something tighten in his chest. This woman who'd arrived as a stranger, who'd been purchased like property, who had every reason to flee the chaos consuming his life. She stayed, she worked, she fought. They're stable, she announced, making notes in her somehow intact notebook. Continuing to show improvement, but we're still behind schedule on treatments. Eliza, Gabe said carefully, given what just happened, no one would blame you for leaving. She looked up from her notes. Are you asking me to leave? No, but I'm saying you could, should, maybe. Why? Because things got dangerous? She closed her notebook. Gabe, I've been in danger since the moment I stepped off that stagecoach. But I'm not running. Not from Hale, not from the work, not from whatever comes next. Why not? Because for the first time in my life, I'm not hiding who I am. I'm not pretending to be less capable to make men comfortable. I'm doing real work that matters, and I'll be damned if I let Victor Hale or anyone else stop me. Tom cleared his throat from the barn entrance. Hate to interrupt, but we got company. Sheriff's coming up the road. Gabe's stomach dropped. Alone? Looks like. No posse that I can see. They met Sheriff Pike at the main house. The lawman dismounted slowly, his face troubled. He wasn't wearing his usual casual demeanor. This was official business. Gabe, he said, we need to talk. About? Victor Hale. His men found him an hour ago, pulled him out of a collapsed mine shaft up in your North Ridge. He's alive, but barely. 3 of his hired guns are dead, buried under tons of rock. Gabe kept his expression neutral. That's unfortunate. That's manslaughter, potentially. Pike's hand rested on his gun belt. Hale claims you and Miss Vance deliberately triggered the collapse. Says you lured him into the mine and tried to murder him. That's a lie, Eliza said flatly. Hale and his men cornered us in that mine with clear intent to kill us. We defended ourselves. The collapse was an accidental result of the confrontation. You got witnesses to that? Do we need them? Hale brought 4 armed men to an isolated location to confront 2 unarmed people. The intent seems fairly clear. Pike sighed. Miss Vance, I believe you. But believing and proving are different things. Hale's already talking to his lawyers. He's going to claim self-defense, that he was investigating illegal mining operations on what he says is his land. His land? Gabe's voice went dangerous. That mine is on Calder property, has been for 3 generations. According to your deed, yes, but Hale's claiming the foreclosure gives him property rights. Says you were trespassing on land that's functionally his. That's insane, that's expensive lawyers. Pike shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Look, I came out here to warn you. Hale's filing charges. Attempted murder, destruction of property, illegal chemical weapons. He's throwing everything at you, and he's got enough money to make at least some of it stick. So what do we do? Eliza asked. Honestly, leave. Tonight. Get as far from Montana territory as you can before the warrants go through. Pike looked genuinely pained. I can't officially tell you that, but unofficially, run. Gabe looked at his ranch, the barn where recovering cattle stood as proof of Eliza's genius. The land his family had held for generations, the life he'd built and nearly lost, and was now fighting to save. No, he said. Gabe, I'm not running. Not from Hale, not from false charges, not from anything. He met Pike's eyes. If he wants to destroy me, he can try doing it honestly, in court, with evidence and witnesses and all the legal processes money can buy. He'll win. Maybe, but at least I'll make him work for it. Pike nodded slowly. All right, your choice. But don't say I didn't warn you. He remounted his horse. For what it's worth, I hope you're right. Hale's been poisoning this territory for years. Would be nice to see him lose for once. The sheriff rode away, leaving Gabe and Eliza standing in the fading light. We're going to lose everything, Eliza said quietly. Probably. The ranch, our freedom, possibly our lives. That's the likely outcome, yes. And you're still not running? Gabe turned to her. Are you? She smiled, tired but genuine. Not a chance. Then we'd better get back to work. We have cattle to save and a case to build. They worked through the night, treating more animals, documenting everything, preparing for a legal battle neither of them were qualified to fight. Tom helped where he could, his loyalty unwavering despite the mounting danger. Around midnight, Eliza spoke without looking up from her calculations. We need more than medical evidence. What do you mean? To prove Hale sabotaged your ranch, we need a chain of custody. We need to show how infected materials got to your water source, who had access, who had motive. She tapped her pencil against her notebook. The contaminated cattle hide we found isn't enough. We need documents, financial records, something that ties Hale directly to the sabotage. Those would be in his office in town, behind locked doors, and probably a safe. Exactly. Gabe stared at her. You're suggesting we break into Victor Hale's office. I'm suggesting we acquire evidence through whatever means necessary. That's insane. That's suicidal. So is standing trial without proof of our innocence. Eliza met his gaze. Hale tried to kill us, Gabe. He murdered your cattle, destroyed your livelihood, and now he's using the law to finish what violence couldn't. We can either accept that, or we can fight dirty. And if we get caught? Then we're in exactly the same position we're already in. Might as well try. Tom had been listening from across the barn. She's right, boss. Hale's not playing fair. No reason we should. Gabe looked between them, Eliza with her scientific mind now bent toward illegal activities, and Tom with his decades of frontier wisdom, and realized they were both absolutely correct. The law wouldn't save them. Evidence might. When? He asked. Tonight, Eliza said. While Hale's still recovering, while his attention is divided, while we still have the element of surprise. What about the cattle? Tom can handle the next round of treatments. I've documented the protocols clearly enough. She stood, determination replacing exhaustion on her face. We go now. We search fast. We leave no trace. Except the evidence we steal. Borrow. We're borrowing evidence that rightfully proves our case. That's not how theft works. It is tonight. They prepared quickly. Dark clothes, quiet boots, tools for picking locks, skills Eliza apparently possessed along with her medical training, which raised questions Gabe decided not to ask. The ride into town took an hour. Blackwater Junction was mostly dark, only a few saloons still showing light. Hale's office sat on the main street, a two-story building that proclaimed his wealth and status. Hale Enterprises in gold letters across the window. They tied their horses in an alley 2 blocks away and approached on foot, moving through shadows like thieves. Because that's what they were. Thieves breaking the law to prove someone else had broken it first. The front door was locked, but Eliza had it open in 30 seconds, her lockpicks working with practiced efficiency. Where did you learn that? Gabe whispered. Medical school. Some of the anatomy labs were kept locked. We got creative. They slipped inside, closing the door behind them. The office was exactly what Gabe expected. Expensive furniture, paintings of Montana landscapes, a massive desk that probably cost more than most people made in a year. You search the desk, Eliza said. I'll check the file cabinets. They worked by moonlight filtering through windows, not daring to light a lamp. Gabe rifled through desk drawers, finding contracts, correspondence, financial ledgers. Nothing obviously incriminating. Then in the bottom drawer locked but accessible with Eliza's picks, he found it. A ledger labeled Land Acquisitions, Private. Inside were entries dating back years, property names, purchase prices. But more than that, notes, strategies, methods. Calder Ranch, resistant to sale. Alternate approaches required. Below that, a series of dates and cryptic notes. Materials acquired. Placement complete. Expected timeline, 3 to 4 months. The dates matched. The timeline matched. It was all there. Written in Hale's own hand or close enough. Eliza, Gabe breathed. I found it. She crossed to him, reading over his shoulder. Her fingers traced the entries, her breathing quickening. This is it. This is proof. Can we use it in court? If we're smart about how we obtained it. She began photographing pages with a small camera from her bag. We take pictures. Leave the original. Claim we received the evidence anonymously. Will anyone believe that? Probably not, but it plants doubt, and doubt is all we need. They were halfway through documenting the ledger when the front door opened. Gabe and Eliza froze. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor below. A lamp lit, golden light spilling up the staircase toward the second-floor office where they crouched. Check upstairs, a voice said. Unfamiliar. One of Hale's men, probably. They had seconds. Gabe grabbed the ledger, Eliza grabbed her camera, and they moved to the window. 2 stories up. No easy exit. Footsteps on the stairs. Eliza opened the window, looked down, looked at Gabe. Can you climb? Not well. Learn fast. She went first, lowering herself out the window and finding handholds on decorative trim that was never meant to support human weight. Gabe followed, his fingers screaming as he gripped carved wood and frozen metal. Above them, the office door opened. Light flooded out. "Someone's been here," the voice shouted. Gabe and Eliza dropped the last 6 feet, landing hard in the alley below. Pain shot through Gabe's ankle, but he ignored it, grabbing Eliza's hand and running. Behind them, shouts, the sound of men mobilizing. They reached their horses, mounted, and rode hard out of town. The ledger was pressed against Gabe's chest, proof of crimes that could destroy Hale's empire or get them killed trying, possibly both. They didn't stop until they were back at the ranch, both breathing hard, both terrified and exhilarated. "We did it," Eliza said. "We actually did it. We stole evidence from a powerful man who already wants us dead." Details. She was grinning despite everything. "We have proof, Gabe. Real proof that can change everything." He looked at the ledger, at the woman beside him, who'd gone from mail-order bride to co-conspirator in barely a week, and felt something shift. They weren't just fighting for the ranch anymore. They were fighting for truth, for justice, for the principle that intelligence and courage could defeat wealth and corruption. And maybe, just maybe, they could actually win. The photographs came out grainy but readable. Eliza developed them herself in the tack room she'd converted into a laboratory, using chemicals that made the small space reek of vinegar and sulfur. Gabe watched the images emerge in the developing tray like ghosts materializing from nothing. Hale's handwriting, his private ledger, evidence of deliberate sabotage written in ink that couldn't be denied. "Will it hold up in court?" Gabe asked. Eliza lifted one photograph with tongs, examining it in the dim red light. "Depends on the judge. Depends on how good Hale's lawyers are. Depends on 100 variables I can't control." She hung the image to dry. "But it's better than nothing." Not exactly a ringing endorsement. "I'm a scientist, not a lawyer. I deal in probabilities, not certainties." She moved to the next photograph. "What I can tell you is this. Combined with the contaminated materials we found, the pattern of infection spread, and the timeline of Hale's land acquisition attempts, we have a compelling narrative. Whether that narrative convinces a territorial judge is another matter entirely." Tom appeared in the doorway, his face grave. "Boss, we got a problem." "Another one? The kind that rides on horseback and carries federal authority." Tom jerked his thumb toward the main house. "U.S. Marshal just arrived. Says he's here to investigate the deaths in the mine." Gabe's stomach tightened. "Just one marshal? Far as I can see. But he's asking a lot of questions and taking a lot of notes." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that assume we're guilty of something." Gabe exchanged a glance with Eliza. They'd known this was coming. Hale wouldn't let the mine collapse go unanswered, and with 3 men dead, federal involvement was inevitable. "Hide the ledger photographs," Gabe said. "Somewhere they won't find them, even if they search." "Already done. Buried them in a tin box out past the south pasture." Eliza wiped chemical residue from her hands. "Should I stay here or come with you?" "Come. Running and hiding looks guilty." They found the marshal standing on the porch, a tall man in his 40s with the kind of weathered face that came from years of hard living. His badge caught the morning light, and his eyes tracked Gabe and Eliza's approach with professional assessment. "Gabriel Calder?" the marshal asked. "That's me." "Marshal James Whitfield. I'm investigating the deaths of 3 men in a mining incident on your property 4 days ago." He pulled out a notebook. "You want to tell me what happened?" Gabe chose his words carefully. "Victor Hale and 4 armed men cornered me and Miss Vance in an old mine shaft. They made threats. A confrontation ensued. The structural instability of the mine caused a collapse. Hale survived. 3 of his men didn't." "That's convenient for you." "Convenient would have been Hale not trying to kill us in the first place." Whitfield's expression didn't change. "Mr. Hale tells a different story. Says you lured him into the mine under false pretenses, then deliberately triggered an explosion to murder him and his associates." "Mr. Hale is a liar," Eliza said flatly. "He brought armed men to an isolated location to eliminate witnesses to his criminal activities. We defended ourselves." "What criminal activities would those be, ma'am?" "Agricultural sabotage, deliberate introduction of parasitic infection to livestock, biological warfare designed to bankrupt Mr. Calder and force a land sale." Whitfield wrote slowly, his pen scratching across paper. "That's a serious accusation." It's a serious crime. You have evidence? We do. Physical evidence of contaminated materials planted near water sources. Documentation of infection patterns inconsistent with natural transmission. And financial records showing Mr. Hale's pattern of acquiring properties through questionable means. The marshal looked up from his notes. What kind of financial records? The kind found in his private ledgers. And how did you come to possess these ledgers? The question hung in the air like a noose. Gabe felt Eliza tense beside him, calculating how much truth to reveal. We obtained copies through means I'd prefer not to detail, she said carefully. But the content is authentic and directly relevant to establishing motive for Mr. Hale's actions. Ma'am, if you're telling me you broke into Mr. Hale's property and stole private documents, I'm telling you we have evidence of criminal conspiracy that resulted in substantial property damage and endangered lives. How we obtained that evidence is secondary to its content. Whitfield closed his notebook. That's not how the law works, Miss Vance. And I'm well aware of how the law works, Marshal. I'm also aware that powerful men often manipulate legal systems to avoid accountability. Victor Hale has been operating with impunity in this territory for years. Perhaps it's time someone actually investigated his activities instead of just taking his word as gospel. You're not doing yourself any favors with that attitude. I'm not trying to do myself favors. I'm trying to prevent a corrupt land baron from committing murder and calling it business. The marshal studied her for a long moment, and Gabe couldn't read his expression, skepticism, interest. It was impossible to tell. I'll need to see this evidence, Whitfield said finally. All of it. The contaminated materials, the infection documentation, and these alleged financial records. Of course, Eliza said. Though I should warn you, the scientific evidence requires some explanation. The parasitology isn't immediately obvious to lay people. I'm not a layperson, Miss Vance. I have a degree in natural sciences from Yale, worked as a field researcher before I took this badge. He smiled slightly. Try me. Eliza's eyebrows rose. Well, that's unexpected. Most things are, if you pay attention. They spent the next 3 hours walking Marshal Whitfield through everything. The cattle plague, the treatment protocol, the contaminated materials found near the water source, the infection patterns, the timeline of Hale's acquisition attempts. Whitfield asked sharp questions, took meticulous notes, and examined the scientific evidence with the kind of informed skepticism that came from actual understanding. He studied Eliza's treatment records, her microscope slides, her documented dosage calculations. This is impressive work, he said, peering through the microscope at a blood sample showing the Babesia parasites. I've read about parasitic cattle diseases, but never seen a successful treatment protocol implemented in field conditions. Thank you, Eliza said, surprised by the genuine respect in his voice. Where did you train? Philadelphia College of Medicine. They accept women now? They accepted me under duress after 3 years of legal pressure. My degree is technically provisional and professionally worthless. Their loss. Whitfield straightened from the microscope. This caliber of work would be respected at any research institution I know. Eliza looked like she didn't know how to respond to that. Gabe watched her process the unexpected validation, saw something shift in her expression. Not quite hope, but something adjacent to it. Can you use this in your investigation? Gabe asked. I can document it. Whether it carries legal weight depends on factors beyond my control. Whitfield moved to examine the contaminated cattle hide they'd recovered. Tell me about the mine confrontation. Exactly what happened, step by step. Gabe recounted the events, keeping his voice steady and factual. The ambush, Hale's threats, Eliza's chemical diversion, the collapse, their escape through the ventilation shaft. And you're certain Hale intended to kill you? He said as much, called it an accident waiting to happen, said no one would question our deaths in an old mine shaft. But you have no witnesses to corroborate this. We have Hale's pattern of behavior. We have motive. We have opportunity. What you have is a dead man's word against a living man's lawyers. Whitfield closed his notebook. Here's the reality, Mr. Calder. 3 men are dead. Federal law requires I investigate. Victor Hale has filed formal charges accusing you and Miss Vance of murder, attempted murder, theft, destruction of property, and illegal weapons use. Those charges carry significant weight, regardless of his personal character. So we're going to be arrested, Eliza said. I didn't say that. I said the charges have weight, but so does your evidence. He looked between them. I'm inclined to believe your version of events. The physical evidence supports it. The scientific documentation is compelling, and frankly, Hale's reputation precedes him. I've been hearing complaints about his business practices since I arrived in the territory. Then help us, Gabe said. I am, by not arresting you immediately. Whitfield tucked his notebook away. But I can't ignore federal charges. I need to complete my investigation, compile a full report, and submit recommendations to the territorial court. That process takes time. How much time? 2 weeks, minimum. Possibly more if Hale's lawyers start filing motions. We don't have 2 weeks. Hale's foreclosure deadline is in 3 days. That's a civil matter, outside my jurisdiction. Whitfield headed toward his horse. My advice? Get yourself a good lawyer and prepare for a long legal fight. What you've built here, the evidence, the treatment protocol, the documented proof of sabotage, it's solid work. But solid work doesn't always win in court. He mounted, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope you win. Territory needs fewer men like Hale and more people actually willing to fight for what's right. The marshal rode away, leaving Gabe and Eliza standing in the yard with the weight of reality settling over them like snow. 3 days, Gabe said quietly. Until foreclosure, yes. And 2 weeks until maybe, possibly, the federal investigation clears us of murder charges. That's the timeline. Gabe looked at his ranch, the barn where cattle now stood healthy, proof that impossible things could happen. The land his family had held for generations, the life he'd built from dirt and determination, 3 days from losing it all. I need to go into town, he said, find a lawyer, see if there's any legal way to delay the foreclosure. There isn't. I already checked the territorial statutes. Once the deadline passes, Hale has the right to immediate possession. So that's it? We just accept it? Eliza was quiet for a moment, staring at the horizon like it held answers. There might be one option. I'm listening. We make the treatment public, free, open to any rancher in the territory who needs it. She turned to him. If we can cure the cattle plague across multiple ranches, prove the method works at scale, it creates economic value, substantial economic value. That gives you leverage. Leverage how? Hale wants this ranch because it's strategic, good land, water rights, positioned perfectly for his expansion plans. But if you become the person who saved the Montana cattle industry, you become politically valuable. Territorial governors notice things like that. So do federal officials. So do voters. Gabe processed that. You're talking about turning this into a publicity campaign. I'm talking about survival through visibility. Hale operates in shadows. He uses legal mechanisms and quiet violence to get what he wants. But if we shine enough light on what we're doing, on what he's done, it becomes harder for him to simply take what he wants without consequences. That's a hell of a gamble. Everything we've done has been a gamble. This is just the biggest one yet. Eliza's expression was fierce. We have 3 days. I say we use them to cure every sick cow in a 50-mile radius and make damn sure everyone knows who did it and why it was necessary. Tom had been listening from the barn entrance. She's right, boss. Word's already spreading about the cattle getting better. Half the ranchers in the territory are desperate for help. You offer it free, they'll remember, and they vote. Gabe looked between them. Eliza with her scientific brilliance now bent toward political strategy, and Tom with his frontier pragmatism, and realized they were proposing something impossible and necessary in equal measure. All right, he said, let's save some cattle. They worked through the night preparing treatment kits. Eliza calculated dosages, wrote instructions, measured compounds with meticulous precision. She created protocols simple enough for untrained ranchers to follow, but detailed enough to ensure safety. Gabe and Tom spread the word. They rode to neighboring properties, made announcements in town, sent messages through every channel available. Free treatment for cattle plague. No cost. No obligation. Just bring your sick animals or come learn the protocol. By dawn, the first ranchers started arriving. Frank Holloway came with 6 dying cows in a stock trailer. The same man who'd accused Eliza of price gouging a week earlier now stood hat in hand, asking for help. Heard you're offering free treatment, he said, not quite meeting Gabe's eyes. That's right. Even after I said those things about profiteering? Even after. Gabe gestured to the barn. Miss Vance will show you the protocol. Pay attention. You'll need to continue treatments for 5 days. Holloway nodded, still not looking up. I was wrong about what I said, about thinking you were trying to take advantage. Forget it. Let's just save your cattle. More ranchers came throughout the day. Some brought animals. Others came just to learn, taking notes while Eliza demonstrated injection techniques and explained dosage calculations. She repeated the same information dozens of times, never losing patience, never cutting corners on safety. By evening, they'd treated over 40 cattle from 7 different ranches. Word was spreading faster than infection had. Morrison arrived near sunset, not with cattle, but with news. Hale knows what you're doing. He's furious. Been in his office all day with lawyers, shouting loud enough the whole town can hear. Let him shout, Gabe said. He's saying you're practicing medicine without a license. Says he's going to file injunctions, get you shut down. On what grounds? We're offering free agricultural assistance on our own property. Don't matter if it's legal. Matters if he can make it expensive enough to defend. Morrison shifted his weight. But I wanted you to know. People are talking about how you're helping when Hale never did, about how Miss Vance figured out what the university experts couldn't. You're making him look bad, and he doesn't like it. Good, Eliza said, emerging from the barn with chemical stains on her sleeves and exhaustion written across her face. He should feel bad. He caused this. Can you prove that? We're working on it. Morrison left and the work continued. Treatment after treatment, rancher after rancher, each one a small victory against the plague that had devastated the territory for months. Around midnight, a different kind of visitor arrived, a woman in expensive traveling clothes, stepping down from a private carriage with an elegance that didn't belong in a ranch yard. Mr. Calder, she called. My name is Charlotte Brennan. I'm an attorney with the Territorial Justice Association, and I've been following your situation with great interest. Gabe approached cautiously. What kind of interest? The kind that involves representing you in your upcoming legal battles. Pro bono, if you'll have me. Pro bono means free, right? It does. Why would you work for free? Charlotte Brennan smiled. Because Victor Hale has been using legal manipulation to destroy people in this territory for 15 years, and I'm tired of watching him win. When I heard about a rancher and a female scientist fighting back against his sabotage, I decided it was time to actually do something about it. Eliza emerged from the barn, wiping her hands on a rag. You're a lawyer? Trained at Harvard, practiced in Boston before moving west. Territorial law is my specialty. Women can be lawyers. In Montana Territory, yes, not everywhere, but here. Charlotte's eyes were sharp, assessing. I understand you're a parasitologist from Philadelphia, also operating outside the conventional boundaries of your profession. That's one way to put it. Then we'll get along well. Charlotte pulled documents from her bag. I've reviewed the foreclosure filing. It's airtight, unfortunately. The deadline stands. However, there are options for legal challenges that could delay enforcement. How long? Gabe asked. 60 days, maybe 90 if I'm creative. And after that? After that, we need to either pay the debt in full or win the sabotage case decisively enough to invalidate the original loan agreements. She looked between them. I hear you have evidence. We do, Eliza said. Physical evidence of contamination, documentation of infection patterns, and financial records showing Hale's pattern of acquisition through questionable means. The financial records, how were they obtained? Through methods that wouldn't survive legal scrutiny. Then we won't use them directly, but they can guide our investigation toward legitimate evidence. Charlotte smiled. I'm very good at finding creative legal pathways, Miss Vance. That's why Hale is going to hate me. They talked through the night, building strategy. Charlotte was brilliant, sharp, knowledgeable, and utterly fearless in her assessment of how to fight Hale in court. She saw angles Gabe hadn't considered, legal mechanisms that could turn Hale's own tactics against him. The key is public opinion, she explained. Territorial judges are appointed, but they're also political. They respond to pressure. If we can make this case visible enough, controversial enough, politically significant enough, we create leverage. That's what we're trying to do, Eliza said, by making the treatment public. Good. Keep doing it. Document everything. Get testimonials from ranchers you've helped. Build a narrative of community benefit versus corporate greed. Charlotte made notes. I'll file the delay motions tomorrow. That buys us time. Then we prepare for the actual trial. Trial for what? The mine deaths or the foreclosure? Both. They're connected. If we can prove Hale sabotaged your ranch, it invalidates his claim to foreclosure on economic grounds. If we can prove he tried to murder you, it invalidates everything on criminal grounds. And if we can't prove either, Charlotte's expression was honest. Then you lose the ranch, face possible murder charges, and Hale wins again, like he always does. The words hung heavy in the night air. But there was something else in Charlotte's voice, determination, the kind that came from someone who'd watched injustice prevail too many times and decided to finally fight back. When's the hearing? Gabe asked. 3 days from now. Foreclosure proceedings in territorial court, Blackwater Junction. Charlotte stood, gathering her documents. I'll need complete access to all your evidence. The contaminated materials, treatment records, everything. And I'll need Miss Vance available to testify as an expert witness. I've never testified in court, Eliza said. You'll learn. You're brilliant, you're credible, and you're a woman fighting against a corrupt male establishment. The optics are perfect. Charlotte headed toward her carriage. Get some sleep, all of you. The next few days are going to be brutal. She left in a swirl of expensive fabric and competent confidence. Gabe watched the carriage disappear down the road and felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Actual hope. Not the desperate, grasping kind, but real, substantive hope based on legal strategy and political leverage and the possibility that intelligence and courage might actually triumph over wealth and corruption. She's impressive, Eliza said. She's terrifying. Same thing, often. Eliza looked at the barn, where treated cattle rested peacefully. We're really doing this, fighting Hale in open court. Looks like. We could still lose everything. We could. But at least we're fighting. At least there's that. They stood together in the darkness, two people who'd been strangers a week ago, now bound by shared purpose and impossible circumstances. The ranch was quiet except for the sound of healthy cattle breathing and the distant call of night birds. 3 days until the hearing. 3 days to treat more ranches, build more evidence, prepare for a legal battle that would determine everything. Gabe felt exhausted and energized in equal measure. The work was just beginning. The real fight was still ahead. But standing there with Eliza beside him, with Charlotte Brennan's legal expertise backing them, with ranchers across the territory benefiting from their free treatment, Gabe realized something fundamental had changed. They weren't victims anymore. They weren't people things happened to. They were fighters, strategists, people who'd looked at impossible odds and decided to make their own possibilities. And whatever happened in that courtroom 3 days from now, Gabe knew one thing with absolute certainty. They wouldn't go down without making Victor Hale bleed for every inch of ground he tried to take. The war was coming to its climax, and they were ready. The territorial courthouse in Blackwater Junction was built from Montana granite and territorial ambition, a monument to the idea that law could tame wilderness. Gabe stood on its steps 3 days later, watching townspeople gather like this was entertainment rather than someone's entire life hanging in the balance. Which, he supposed, it was for them. Most people had so little excitement in their lives, they'd take it wherever they could find it, even in other people's ruin. A lot of faces out here, Tom muttered beside him. More than I expected. Word travels. People want to see if David actually beats Goliath this time. Eliza emerged from Charlotte's carriage, dressed in a dark blue suit that made her look like she belonged in a university lecture hall rather than a Montana courtroom. She'd pinned her hair back severely, no softness anywhere in her appearance. This was Eliza the scientist, Eliza the expert, not the woman who'd spent 3 nights straight treating cattle in a freezing barn. Ready? Charlotte asked, adjusting her own perfectly tailored jacket. No, Eliza admitted. But I doubt that matters. It doesn't. Come on. Judge Morrison starts precisely on time, and he hates tardiness more than he hates complicated cases. They entered the courthouse together, footsteps echoing on marble floors that seemed designed to make people feel small. The courtroom itself was intimidating. High ceilings, dark wood, the territorial seal mounted behind the judge's bench like a warning that this space belonged to power, not people. Victor Hale was already seated at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by 3 lawyers in expensive suits. He looked recovered from the mine collapse, though Gabe noticed he moved stiffly and kept one arm close to his ribs. Broken bones, probably. A reminder that despite all his money and influence, Hale was as mortal as anyone else. Hale's eyes found Gabe across the courtroom, and something cold passed between them. Recognition, hatred, the understanding that one of them was walking out of here destroyed. Judge Morrison entered, a barrel-chested man in his 60s with white hair and eyes that had seen every scheme the frontier could produce. "Be seated," he said without preamble. "We're here for foreclosure proceedings in the matter of Hale Financial versus Gabriel Calder, with additional motions regarding criminal charges stemming from events at the Calder Ranch mine shaft. Miss Brennan, I understand you're representing the defendant?" Charlotte stood. "I am, Your Honor. And you filed motions to delay foreclosure pending resolution of criminal matters?" "I have. The criminal charges and foreclosure are intrinsically linked. Mr. Hale's claim to foreclosure rests on debt incurred during a period when he was actively sabotaging Mr. Calder's ranch through biological warfare. We intend to prove that the underlying debt is fraudulent and the foreclosure claim invalid." One of Hale's lawyers shot to his feet. "Your Honor, these are baseless accusations. I'll determine what's baseless, Mr. Thornton. Sit down." Morrison looked at Charlotte. "You have evidence of this alleged sabotage?" "Substantial evidence, Your Honor. Physical, scientific, and documentary." "Then I'll hear it, but make it quick. I have 3 more cases today." Morrison settled into his chair. "Proceed." Charlotte called Eliza as her first witness. Watching her take the stand, Gabe felt his chest tighten. Everything rested on this, on whether a territorial judge would believe a woman scientist over a wealthy landowner, on whether intelligence could defeat money in a system designed to favor the latter. "Miss Vance," Charlotte began, "please state your qualifications for the court." Eliza's voice was steady, professional. "I hold a degree in medicine from Philadelphia College of Medicine with a specialization in parasitology. I've published research on waterborne parasites in the Journal of Medical Science and spent 3 years conducting field research in tropical disease environments." "Objection," Thornton called. "The witness's degree is provisional at best. Women cannot be licensed physicians in most jurisdictions." "I'm not claiming to be a licensed physician," Eliza said before the judge could respond. "I'm claiming expertise in parasitology, which is a scientific discipline, not a medical one. My research has been peer-reviewed and published in legitimate scientific journals. My gender doesn't change the validity of my work." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Overruled. Continue, Miss Brennan." Charlotte walked Eliza through the technical details. The identification of Babesia parasites in cattle blood. The development of the arsenic-based treatment protocol. The recovery rates among treated animals. The infection patterns that indicated deliberate placement rather than natural transmission. "And what led you to conclude the infection was deliberately introduced?" Charlotte asked. "Multiple factors. First, the geographic concentration. Infections clustered around specific water sources rather than dispersing naturally. Second, the timeline. Sudden onset across the herd rather than gradual spread. Third, the discovery of contaminated biological materials buried near the primary water source in a manner inconsistent with natural occurrence." "Can you elaborate on these contaminated materials?" "Infected cattle hide wrapped in oilcloth and deliberately placed underground near where healthy cattle would drink. As the material decomposed, infected ticks would emerge and attach to animals using that water source. It's a sophisticated biological attack designed to look like natural disease." The courtroom had gone very quiet. Gabe watched faces in the gallery, ranchers who'd lost cattle, townspeople who'd watched the plague devastate the territory, even the judge himself leaning forward with interest. Thornton stood for cross-examination. "Miss Vance, you claim to have found contaminated materials on my client's property." "On the Calder Ranch," Eliza corrected, "which belongs to Mr. Calder, not your client. For now. But you admit to finding these materials buried in soil, correct?" "Correct." "And how do you know they were deliberately placed rather than naturally occurring? Cattle die in fields all the time. Their remains decompose, ticks spread naturally." "The placement depth was inconsistent with natural burial. The oilcloth wrapping doesn't occur naturally, and the specific location, directly adjacent to the primary water source, represents a statistically improbable coincidence." "Improbable, but not impossible?" "In the strict sense, no, not impossible, but the probability is so low as to be functionally zero. So you're asking this court to destroy my client's reputation based on your interpretation of probability? I'm asking this court to acknowledge observable reality. Someone deliberately infected the Calder Ranch cattle. The evidence points to your client, who had motive, opportunity, and a documented pattern of acquiring properties through questionable means. Thornton's expression hardened. What documented pattern? What evidence? Charlotte stood. Your Honor, if I may introduce Exhibit C, financial records from Mr. Hale's private ledgers showing a systematic approach to property acquisition, including notation of alternate approaches when standard purchase offers are refused. Objection, Thornton's voice rose. Those records were obtained illegally through breaking and entering. The copies were provided anonymously, Charlotte said smoothly. Their method of acquisition doesn't change their content, which shows clear premeditation toward sabotage. Morrison examined the ledger copies, his expression unreadable. Gabe held his breath. This was the moment. Either the judge would see past the technical illegality to the truth underneath, or he'd dismiss it on procedural grounds and hand victory to Hale. I'll allow it, Morrison said finally, but only as supporting evidence, not primary proof. Continue, Miss Brennan. The testimony went on for hours. Charlotte methodically built her case, piece by piece, witness by witness. Tom testified about finding the buried materials. Marshall Whitfield testified about the mine confrontation and Hale's threats. Ranchers testified about the sudden onset of disease and the recovery after Eliza's treatments. Each testimony chipped away at Hale's position, but Gabe could see his lawyers weren't worried. They had their own strategy, and it didn't rely on disputing facts. It relied on something simpler. When Hale himself took the stand, he was perfect, calm, measured, sympathetic. He admitted to wanting the Calder Ranch but denied any wrongdoing. He claimed the mine confrontation was self-defense against trespassers. He suggested delicately that a desperate man and an unstable woman had concocted an elaborate conspiracy theory to avoid paying legitimate debts. Mr. Calder was facing bankruptcy, Hale said, his voice dripping false concern. I understand desperation makes people do irrational things, but creating fantasies about biological warfare and sabotage? That's the thinking of someone who's lost touch with reality. Charlotte's cross-examination was brutal. She walked Hale through his business history, his pattern of acquisitions, his political connections. She forced him to explain why he needed the Calder Ranch specifically when he owned hundreds of thousands of acres already. Business opportunity, Hale said simply. The Calder Ranch occupies strategic land with valuable water rights. It's good business to acquire good properties. Even if it means destroying the current owner, I'm not destroying anyone. I'm collecting on a legitimate debt. A debt that became uncollectible only after Mr. Calder's cattle mysteriously started dying? Coincidence. Unfortunate timing, certainly, but coincidence. You don't believe in very many coincidences, do you, Mr. Hale? I believe in evidence, which Miss Vance has failed to provide any concrete proof of my involvement in her alleged conspiracy. And there it was. The truth that had been hovering over the entire proceeding. They had circumstantial evidence, probability, and pattern, but no direct proof. No witness who'd seen Hale plant the contaminated materials. No document explicitly ordering sabotage. Just a compelling narrative that couldn't quite close into certainty. The testimonies concluded as afternoon light slanted through the courthouse windows. Morrison called for closing arguments. Charlotte stood, and Gabe saw something fierce in her expression. Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about power. Victor Hale has built an empire on the assumption that wealth equals immunity, that he can destroy competitors, manipulate markets, and when challenged, simply outlawyer anyone who opposes him. The evidence before you, while circumstantial, paints a clear picture, a pattern of predatory acquisition, a biological attack disguised as natural disease, an attempted murder concealed as self-defense. Gabriel Calder and Eliza Vance aren't asking for special treatment. They're asking for the law to apply equally, regardless of how much money stands on the other side. Thornton's closing was equally passionate. Circumstantial evidence and conspiracy theories don't override contract law. My client held legitimate notes. Those notes went into default. The law provides clear remedies. Everything else is distraction, an elaborate performance designed to avoid simple financial responsibility. Morrison sat in silence for a long moment. The courtroom held its breath. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. "I'll render my decision in 1 hour," Morrison said finally. "Court is adjourned." The wait was agony. Gabe paced the courthouse steps while Eliza sat on a bench, her scientific calm finally cracking under the weight of uncertainty. Charlotte reviewed her notes, looking for angles she might have missed. Tom smoked his pipe and watched the street with the patience of someone who'd learned that worrying changed nothing. Townspeople lingered, speculating. Gabe heard fragments of conversation, some supportive, some dismissive, most just entertained by the spectacle. Finally, the bailiff appeared. "Judge is ready." They filed back into the courtroom. Morrison sat behind his bench, his expression giving nothing away. Gabe's heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his throat. "I've reviewed all evidence and testimony," Morrison began. "This is among the most complex cases I've adjudicated. The scientific evidence is compelling. The pattern of behavior is suspicious. But suspicion isn't proof, and patterns aren't certainty." Gabe felt his stomach drop. They'd lost. All of it. The ranch, the fight, everything. "However," Morrison continued, and that single word changed everything. "However, I find Miss Vance's expert testimony credible and the physical evidence persuasive. While I cannot conclusively prove deliberate sabotage, I find sufficient cause to believe the underlying debt occurred under circumstances that warrant further investigation." He looked directly at Hale. "Mr. Hale, I'm denying your foreclosure claim pending a full territorial investigation into your business practices. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to federal authorities for criminal investigation regarding potential conspiracy, attempted murder, and fraud." The courtroom erupted. Hale's lawyers immediately began objecting, but Morrison's gavel silenced them. "Mr. Calder, you have 90 days to make arrangements regarding your debt. If the federal investigation exonerates Mr. Hale, foreclosure proceedings will resume. If it confirms Miss Vance's allegations, all claims against your property will be dismissed, and Mr. Hale will face criminal charges." Morrison stood. "This court is adjourned." Gabe couldn't breathe, couldn't think. They hadn't won, not completely, but they hadn't lost either. The ranch was safe, at least temporarily, and Hale, for the first time in his career, was actually facing real consequences. Charlotte grabbed his arm. "That's the best outcome we could have hoped for. Federal investigation means discovery, depositions, forensic accounting. We'll find the proof we need." "How long will that take?" "Months, maybe a year. But you have time now. Time to rebuild, time to fight properly." Eliza appeared beside them, her face flushed with something between relief and disbelief. "We did it. We actually did it." "You did it," Gabe said. "Your testimony, your evidence, that's what convinced him. It was all of us. You fighting when you had every reason to give up, Tom staying loyal, Charlotte finding legal pathways, Marshall Whitfield actually investigating instead of just taking Hale's word." She looked around the courtroom, at the faces of ranchers they'd helped, townspeople they'd convinced. It was everyone deciding that maybe the powerful shouldn't always win. Across the courtroom, Victor Hale stood surrounded by his lawyers, his face a mask of controlled fury. For a moment, his eyes met Gabe's, and there was nothing human there. Just cold calculation and the absolute certainty that this wasn't over. But standing there with Eliza beside him, with legal protection and public support and actual hope for the future, Gabe realized something fundamental. He wasn't afraid of Hale anymore. The war would continue. Federal investigations took time, and Hale had resources to fight at every level. But the terms had changed. Gabe wasn't defending anymore. He was attacking, building alliances, creating value, proving that intelligence and integrity could stand against wealth and corruption. They left the courthouse to cheers from the gathered crowd. Ranchers whose cattle they'd saved, townspeople who were tired of Hale's dominance, even a few of Hale's own former employees who'd quietly switched sides when they saw someone actually willing to fight back. The ride back to the ranch felt different. The land looked the same, frozen, harsh, unforgiving, but Gabe saw possibility instead of struggle. Eliza's treatment protocol was spreading across the territory. Cattle that would have died were living. Economic devastation was turning into recovery. At the ranch, they found Tom had already started celebrating. He'd set up a table outside despite the cold, with whiskey and whatever food he'd been able to scrounge. "Figured we earned it," Tom said, pouring drinks with hands that shook slightly from emotion. Thought I'd never see the day someone actually beat Victor Hale in court. We didn't beat him, Gabe corrected. Not yet. Close enough for government work. Tom raised his glass. To science, stubbornness, and surviving impossible odds. They drank as the sun set over the Montana Valley, painting the snow orange and gold. The cattle were healthy, the ranch was safe, the future was uncertain, but no longer predetermined. Eliza stood slightly apart, looking at the land with an expression Gabe couldn't quite read. He joined her, 2 glasses in hand. Thinking about leaving? He asked, offering her whiskey. She took it, but didn't drink immediately. Thinking about staying, actually, which is strange considering I came here planning to disappear. You did disappear, just not in the way you expected. No, I found something instead. She sipped her whiskey, made a face at the burn. Purpose. Partnership. The ability to actually use what I know without apologizing for knowing it. The mail-order bride arrangement was the worst idea you ever had, and somehow the best thing that happened to either of us. She smiled. Strange how that works. You could stay, Gabe said carefully. Not as a bride necessarily, but as a partner. Build the treatment protocol into a real business, help other ranchers, do actual research without having to hide. That sounds suspiciously like a marriage proposal without the marriage. Call it whatever you want. I'm just saying, you're brilliant, you're capable, and I'd be an idiot to let you walk away. Eliza was quiet for a moment, watching the sunset paint impossible colors across impossible land. I spent years fighting to be recognized, to be valued for my mind instead of dismissed because of my body. And here, in the middle of nowhere, on a failing ranch surrounded by dying cattle, I finally found it. So that's a yes? That's a, let's see where this goes. She turned to face him. I want to stay, Gabe. I want to build something real here. But I need it to be actual partnership, equal voice, equal credit, not you being generous to the clever woman who helped save your ranch. Done. Equal partnership. I handle the ranch operations, you handle the science and treatment protocols. We build it together. She extended her hand. Then we have a deal. They shook, and it felt more binding than any contract or marriage certificate could have been. A commitment based on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than social convention or financial arrangement. Tom appeared with the whiskey bottle. You two done negotiating, or should I come back later? Done, Gabe said. Pour another round. I want to toast to the strangest business partnership in Montana history. Second strangest, Tom corrected. I knew a prospector once who partnered with a bear. Long story. Didn't end well. They drank and talked as stars appeared overhead. Charlotte arrived later, bringing news that the federal investigation was already beginning, that Hale's business records were being subpoenaed, that the tide was genuinely turning. He's going to fight, she warned. Don't expect this to be quick or easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, Eliza said. Over the following weeks, the ranch transformed. Word of the treatment protocol spread across Montana and into neighboring territories. Ranchers came from hundreds of miles away, bringing sick cattle and desperate hope. Eliza trained others in the methods, turning her individual effort into a collective movement. The federal investigation ground forward with bureaucratic slowness, but it ground forward nonetheless. Hale's financial records revealed patterns of manipulation across dozens of properties. His political connections started fracturing as officials distanced themselves from potential scandal. Gabe and Eliza worked side by side, building something larger than either of them had imagined. The ranch became a research station. The barn became a training facility. What started as survival became innovation. 3 months after the trial, Marshal Whitfield returned with news. Federal prosecutor is filing charges, he said. Conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder. Hale's lawyers are already negotiating plea deals. Will he actually serve time? Gabe asked. Probably not. Men like Hale rarely do, but his business empire is collapsing. Properties are being seized. Associates are testifying against him to save themselves. Whitfield smiled slightly. You didn't just beat him in court. You destroyed the foundation his entire operation was built on. Good, Eliza said simply. The final resolution came 6 months later. Hale accepted a plea agreement, financial restitution, surrender of fraudulently acquired properties, and permanent prohibition from operating in Montana territory. No jail time, but complete ejection from the region he'd dominated for decades. The Calder Ranch's debt was officially forgiven as part of the settlement. The foreclosure was vacated. The land was secure. Gabe stood on his porch the day the settlement was finalized, looking at property that was fully, legally, indisputably his. Eliza emerged from the barn, her hair pulled back in its practical style, chemical stains on her work clothes, looking nothing like a mail-order bride and everything like a frontier scientist changing the world one cattle treatment at a time. "Hale's gone," Gabe said. "Really gone." "I heard. Charlotte sent word." Eliza joined him on the porch. "How do you feel?" "Honestly? Empty. I spent so long fighting him that now that it's over, I don't quite know what to do with myself." "You could try building instead of defending. Revolutionary concept, I know. Smart ass. You literally hired me for my intelligence. Don't complain when I use it." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the land that had almost destroyed them now spreading out full of possibility. The cattle plague was defeated. The treatment protocol was saving animals across the entire territory. The ranch was profitable for the first time in years. "You know what the strangest part is?" Eliza said. "I came here to disappear, to hide from a world that didn't want me. And instead I found a place where I could finally be exactly who I am." "Montana has that effect." "No, you had that effect. The land is just land. But you, desperate, bankrupt, facing ruin, you looked at a woman with radical ideas and said, 'Yes, try.' Most men would have laughed me out of the territory. Most men are idiots. Present company excluded? Obviously." She laughed, and the sound carried across the valley like a promise. They'd survived when survival seemed impossible. They'd fought when fighting seemed futile. They'd proven that intelligence could defeat wealth, that partnership could overcome isolation, that the future belonged to people willing to build it rather than people trying to buy it. The ranch wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There were still debts to manage, cattle to tend, treatments to administer. Winter was coming again, and Montana winters didn't care about legal victories or scientific breakthroughs. But standing there with Eliza beside him, Gabe realized that perfection wasn't the point. The point was progress. Growth. The constant, difficult work of turning impossible situations into improbable successes. "What do we do now?" he asked. Eliza considered the question, her scientific mind already calculating possibilities. "We expand. Train more people in treatment protocols, publish research, build a legitimate veterinary science program, turn this ranch into something that outlasts us." Ambitious. You expected anything less? From you? Never. 6 months later, the Calder Ranch Veterinary Research Station officially opened. Eliza ran the scientific operations while Gabe managed the ranch itself. They brought in students, trained veterinarians, published papers in Eastern journals that finally acknowledged her work under her own name. Charlotte continued representing them, fighting legal battles against people who thought women shouldn't do science, and ranchers shouldn't challenge established power structures. She won more often than she lost. Tom stayed on as ranch foreman, grumbling about all the newfangled science while secretly proud of everything they'd built. The territorial governor visited, touring the facility and praising the innovation. Word spread to Washington, where federal officials discussed funding similar programs in other territories. Eliza Vance, the woman who'd arrived as purchased property, became one of the most respected veterinary scientists in the Western territories. Her papers on parasitic disease revolutionized livestock management across the continent. And Gabe Calder, the rancher who'd nearly lost everything, built something that mattered more than land or money, a legacy of intelligence, courage, and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat. They never formally married. The mail-order arrangement was quietly forgotten, replaced by a partnership that transcended legal definitions. They were colleagues, allies, friends, and something deeper that didn't need a name to be real. Years later, sitting on the same porch where he'd once watched his world collapse, Gabe looked at the thriving research station, the healthy cattle, the students learning cutting-edge veterinary science, and the woman who'd made it all possible. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked Eliza. She considered, her mind still sharp despite the gray threading through her hair. "No, I imagined survival. Maybe competence, but this?" She gestured at the sprawling complex that had grown around the original ranch. This exceeded every calculation. Science couldn't predict it? Science predicts patterns. This was more like chaos, random circumstances aligning in statistically improbable ways to create something genuinely new. She smiled. I prefer to call it partnership. Partnership that started with a mail-order bride advertisement and almost ended with death in a collapsed mine. The best partnerships usually have interesting origin stories. Tom appeared, older but still working, carrying reports from the day's treatments. Got 3 more ranches requesting training next week, and some professor from Yale wants to visit the facility. Tell him yes, Eliza said. Always yes to legitimate scientific inquiry. Tom left, and Gabe and Eliza sat in comfortable silence as the Montana sun set over land they'd fought for, bled for, and ultimately transformed. The story that began with desperation and impossible odds had become something else entirely. A testament to the idea that intelligence could defeat corruption, that partnership could overcome isolation, that people dismissed by society could build futures no one else believed possible. Victor Hale died 3 years later, broken forgotten in a California boarding house. Few mourned him. His empire had crumbled, his name become synonymous with corruption rather than power. The Calder Ranch Veterinary Research Station continued for decades, training generations of scientists and ranchers in methods that saved countless lives. And somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Montana, on land that had almost been lost to greed and disease, 2 people who should never have met built something that lasted longer than either of them. Not because it was perfect, but because they'd refused to accept that impossible meant permanent. Because they'd looked at dying cattle and distant enemies and impossible odds and decided to try anyway. Because sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to give up when everyone expects you to fail. The Montana winter came again, as it always did. Snow covered the land, wind howled through valleys, and the temperature dropped to levels that could kill the unprepared. But inside the research station, lights glowed warm. Cattle stood healthy in reinforced barns. Students studied parasitology and treatment protocols that would save lives across continents. And on the porch of the original ranch house, 2 partners watched the snowfall and understood something fundamental about survival. It wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. It wasn't about never falling, it was about getting back up. It wasn't about being unbreakable, it was about finding someone who'd help you heal when you shattered. The story of the Calder Ranch began with death and debt and a desperate gamble on a stranger. It ended with life, innovation, and a partnership that changed the frontier forever. Not because they were heroes, but because they were human, flawed, frightened, and absolutely refusing to quit. And in the end, that made all the difference.